Thank you all for being here today. Today we're going to be speaking about the lands that the University of Vermont oversees the stewardship of and has for the past 50 years. But of course, those lands have had their own intrinsic value without our stewardship and have been stewarded by people much longer than our school has been around. So we'd like to start out this event with UVM's land acknowledgement. So I ask if you just quietly read this to yourself or reflect on what it means to be on unceded Abenaki lands. Thank you. I could picture my wife there being like, "You're still reading that?" Because I'm a very slow reader and she is not. And we used to share Harry Potter books 20 years ago when they came out, and it would drive her crazy because it would take me forever to get through the latest copy. But thank you for that. 50 years ago, the university placed 10 natural areas, actually at the time 9. Oh, that wasn't supposed to come up yet. 10 natural areas under the auspices of the environmental program. The environmental program here at the University of Vermont was one of the first university-wide programs to engender study in the environment for undergraduates and also engagement in the environment. So it was one of the first in the entire country to do that. Today we are celebrating the lands that UVM had placed under the environmental program and our management and stewardship of them. So thank you all for being here to celebrate these lands. But before we get into that, I want to give 3 sets of thank yous. The first is for today. Bringing this all together and having you here in community and having food and having PowerPoints and notes, etc. All of this took a tremendous amount of work, and I'd like to thank Lori Anderson, Nakasi Fortune, Colleen Ward, and Hannah Fisher. Could you raise your hands briefly? Thank you so much. So that's how we're here today. A lot of why we get to celebrate these natural areas today is due to the work of my second thank yous. I want to start out by thanking Rick Paradise. Rick is emeritus lecturer and former director of the natural areas. He was a lecturer here and director for over 2 decades. He has an Aldo Leopold Fellowship through the National Endowment for the Arts. He currently sits on the board of the North Branch Nature Center. And we would not be here today celebrating the natural areas if it weren't for his hard work, his incredible sense of humor, and his ability to manage these incredibly diverse places that you'll hear about shortly on a shoestring budget for 2 decades. So, Rick, we have a present for you. Thank you so much for all you've done for the natural areas. Rick's up front here. I also want to thank Professor Tom Hudspeth, who's sitting in the back. We have a present for you too, Tom. The environmental program writ large would not be here today if it weren't for Tom. He was the original assistant director of the environmental program. He has ushered thousands of students in and out of our natural areas and in and out of the country on study abroad programs before you needed to clear them with risk management. Tom is an incredible mentor to so many of us at the university, and really his thumbprint is all over our natural area. So thank you, Tom. And finally, a third set of thanks. We are seeing increased interest in, and more importantly from my position, funding in, and opportunities connected to our natural areas, thanks to several of our key leadership positions at the university. President Patty Prelock has is a huge supporter of the natural areas and have supported our program in the natural areas over the last 3 years, and she's going to give some remarks shortly about how she sees this integrated into bigger visions of the university. Our CFO, Richard Kate, again, a huge supporter of the natural areas and helped to fund our first full-time position of caretaker into the natural areas. And then Vice President for Research, Kirk Dombrowski, also helping to usher a new era for the natural areas under his guidance in his research department. And finally, Josh Benish, who would be a big player today and speaker, but had to miss today because of a family misfortune. But everything that has happened in the natural areas over the last 2 years, the future vision, any funding we have, any good ideas, this entire event, all sits on the shoulders of Josh Benish. So and now to the stars of the day. We're going to do a very quick tour of the natural areas. You're going to hear a lot more about these places, about how we link up with other initiatives on campus, about some of the research and the education and the scholarship that goes on in these places, about some of the wonder of these places. But I'm just going to show you a couple of quick slides on our natural areas. This is an old map kind of image from a trifold that was distributed around in the 80s from the environmental program. The people who know the most about these natural areas are sitting in this room. I've already mentioned them, Rick and Tom. I've learned almost everything I know about the natural areas from going through old files and folders and yellow-looking papers like this. And so my knowledge is very superficial, but just from this timeline, you can see that the university has had stewardship or guidance of these areas since 1839, although they were encapsulated as a natural area system in 1974, 50 years ago. Karst wetlands, we will hear more about today, but it's 330 acres of wetlands and maple ash oak forest just down the road. We'll be hearing from Dr. Amy Seidel about the amazing things that are happening in Karst wetlands over the last few years. Beautiful, beautiful place. Hiking trails, it's nice to ski there in the winter, and if you want to collect ticks and wild parsnip, you can go there in the middle of the summer. Centennial Woods, just over the hill there, one of my favorite places in town, depending on how you count, somewhere between 60 and 100 acres of mature pine forest and hardwood forest, wetland, beaver dam complex, etc. Beautiful place to visit when you need a break from campus. Colchester Bog, 9 miles north of here, 200 acres of open peatland, Cattail Marsh. It's also, we think, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, the northernmost edge of black gum trees. We have black gums there that are over 400 years old. And because of the unique conditions of the bog, this species, which typically favors warmer climes, gets to sit in Colchester Bog. Concord Woods, this was deeded to us in 1839. Very few people, I think the only people in the room that has anyone been to Concord Woods other than Rick and myself? Tom? Yep, it's far and it's hard to get and there's lots of bugs, but it's beautiful, mature sugar maple stand way out west of where we are, east of where we are here. East Woods, just down the road, this is the favorite place of local dog walkers and just goes to speak of one of the big socio-ecological things that we try to manage around here is human and, in this case, canine involvement with our our utilized natural areas. Molly Bog, super special place. Kettle Bog, 31 acres. Pretty much everything we know about interactions between carnivorous plants and carnivorous spiders comes out of science that was done by Professor Nick Gatelli here at UVM, here in Molly Bog. It's been a national landmark, national natural landmark for 50 years. We celebrated its 50 years of that designation last year. You'll be hearing about Mount Mansfield very shortly, and it probably needs no introduction. Top of the state. Amazing place. Pease Mountain, again, just down the road. One small glimpse of Lake Champlain, if you can find it, from Pease Mountain, but a wonderful 180 acres of of oak and sugar maple, and an area where our forestry program has been inventorying all the trees in the entire place. Redstone Quarry, if you haven't been there and you live in Burlington, find it out. It's right down the road. It's hidden, nestled in between houses, 3 acres. A lot of the redstone Moncton quartzite that is used on this campus came from this quarry during the 1800s. Beautiful little spot. And then Shelburne Pond, or as we like to call it, the H. Lawrence Achilles Natural Area at Shelburne Pond, the hand slope. Actually, very few people know that this is its proper title, but we will hear more about that today. Amazing place. University of Vermont stewards around 1,000 acres surrounding that pond. We are not going to go through the agenda. We have them up at the table there. At 3 o'clock, we do have our keynote speaker, Ethan Tapper, and I will be introducing him shortly. So we're going to kick right into the next speaker, and I'm super excited to introduce one of our biggest supporters, as I already mentioned, and that's current president, Dr. and Professor Patty Prelock. Patty is the interim president at the University of Vermont and has been a proud member of this campus for 30 years. She served as the provost. She served as a senior vice president, the dean of the College of Nursing and Health Sciences, a professor in communication in sciences and disorder. She is an active mentor, teacher, researcher, still writing books despite being the provost and the president. She's partnered with faculty, staff, and students, and she is the genesis of the new planetary health initiative across campus. Patty, thank you so much for your support, and thank you for being here today.
Well, it's so great to be here, and congratulations on 50 years of the natural areas and the environment. I just came back from a trip to New York with donors, and I was able to talk about coming back to speak. I said I have to be back to talk about the natural areas and to welcome our community, and also to talk to them about planetary health. You know, the university has set aside our natural areas for important work in an environment that is good for the environment and good for our people here at UVM. And while the university has managed lands for conservation, research, and education for over 50 years, we are entering a time where the integration of nature into all that we do is more crucial than ever. Solving major environmental problems and really human health challenges are increasingly essential to the long-term well-being of the people around the world. And University of Vermont's leadership will directly advance our distinctive efforts in planetary health. The UVM Planetary Health Initiative, as Brendan mentioned, it kind of explores the connections between human health and environmental health, and so that we can actually inspire action that both people and planet can thrive. So if I'm healthy, it's likely my environment is going to be healthier, and if the environment is healthier, it's likely I will be healthier as well. And it's really based on some fundamental principles of whole health: physical, mental, social, spiritual, community, and ecological well-being. It's also based on environmental stewardship, the idea that we can help preserve our planet. It's also about reciprocity, the idea that human and environmental health are inextricably linked. It's about relationships, and it's about hope. And that's been an important component of our Planetary Health Initiative. Instead of feeling badly, it's how can we inspire ourselves to be hopeful and engage in action. Our initiative really harnesses UVM's existing strengths in the health of human societies and the natural environment across the areas of education, research, outreach, policy, and service. It builds on the university's robust tradition of interdisciplinary research, which we are actually pretty good at, and I'm hoping that the Planetary Health Initiative will help us get even better. and really teaching in ecosystem science, public health, global infectious diseases, behavioral medicine, renewable energy, ecological economics, sustainable agriculture, complex systems, environmental thought, the humanities, and beyond. This bold university-wide initiative positions UVM to be a global leader in this area, and my goal is we will be a global leader by 2030. So, how do the UVM natural areas fit in? Well, they help us in achieving our goals in several ways. First, by providing access and outlets to the community for reducing anxiety and relieving stress. If you've just been to Centennial Woods or Shelburne Pond and walking through there, there's just a sense of release of stress and anxiety. I probably should be spending more time there in my new role. Providing places and spaces for our students to learn firsthand about the importance of nature for the whole person health. And I've spent many times taking walks and seeing students in classes and really enjoying being in the field. It's whether it be from the benefits of fresh and clean water we receive from the functioning of our bogs and wetlands, from the awe and inspiration we experience atop Mount Mansfield, or the climate benefits to humans via carbon sequestration in our forest and our woodlands. And then finally, really providing areas for our faculty and staff researchers to truly understand the connections between well-functioning ecosystems and whole person health, and sharing these findings to our community and beyond. It is so great to see this next phase and era of the UVM natural areas as we transition natural areas into a core research facility. I'm happy to know that the next phase of this endeavor is a focus on the tenets of planetary health, and thank you, Brendan, for your incredible leadership, and excited to see where our research and engagement takes us. So thank you all for the incredible work that you do, how you support our students, how you mentor them, the research you're doing. We are going noticed. People are seeing what's happening in Vermont, and I think we can make a difference. So thank you.
So the first section of our symposium today is about the history and future of natural areas, and I want to introduce the Honorable Robert Mello. The Honorable Robert Mello has spent most of his legal career in private practice. He has also served as a special counsel for the Public Service Board and general counsel to the Department of Banking, Insurance, and Securities. A former trustee of the Vermont Historical Society and a current Superior Court judge, the Honorable Robert Mello has had a long life of fascination with American history and the law, especially the early history of Vermont. The Honorable Robert Mello is the author of Moses Robinson and the Founding of Vermont. His interest in Vermont's history, if you haven't heard the story, what he's about to tell you will be hopefully blown away, as I was when I first read it. He's going to talk about the unprecedented purchase in 1859 of the summit of Mount Mansfield by the University of Vermont. So thank you very much for being with us here today, Robert, and please, can we welcome him?
Thank you very much, Brendan. It's a privilege to be here, particularly on this occasion. So the summit of Mount Mansfield in northern Vermont is a special place. It's our highest peak. It's an unusual summit. It's a 2-mile-long, narrow ridge with at least 3 peaks on it, depending on how you count them. The forehead in the south, the chin in the north, and the nose in between. Because it's almost entirely above tree line, the views are absolutely spectacular in every direction. And other than some hiking trails and a few towers, it's largely untouched by human development. What makes the summit of Mount Mansfield especially unique, however, is that it is home to a 250-acre meadow of rare and uncommon plants, usually found only in the Arctic and on a few other high elevation peaks in northern New York, northern New England and eastern Canada, plants like Bigelow's sedge, Highland rush, Greenland sandwort, alpine bilberry, and black crowberry. This meadow is a tiny remnant of the Arctic vegetation that covered the northeastern United States some 10,000 years ago following the retreat of the last Ice Age glaciers. These tundra plants in turn support a small number of unique insects, including the boreal long-lipped tiger beetle and the yellow-banded bumblebee. Just one other peak in Vermont has an alpine meadow. That's Camel's Hump. Its meadow is 10 acres in size. Few plants and animals or insects can survive the harsh conditions found above tree line in our northern mountains. Because these plants are so small and fragile, they also are quite vulnerable to foot damage and development. Therefore, they need to be protected from human activity. Part of the reason why these plants have done as well as they have on Mount Mansfield is because the University of Vermont in 1859 decided to purchase the summit and assume responsibility for preserving it in its natural state. In 1859, two men owned the summit of Mount Mansfield, William H. Bingham of Stowe and John B. Wheeler of Burlington. Bingham also owned the Summit House, a small hotel for tourists located about 300 feet below the summit in the vicinity of the nose. There it is. On September 30, 1859, Wheeler and Bingham signed deeds conveying the 400-acre summit to the university. The deeds were remarkable. Bingham's deed said, quote, "It is a condition of this grant that no timber growing or undergrowth on said tract shall be cut down, set on fire, or used on the above land conveyed, except such as may be necessary for the erection of buildings for scientific purposes." Wheeler's deed specified that the summit of said mountain shall at all times be free for the access of visitors, and it stated that the summit could only be used for, quote, "purposes of an observatory or for scientific purposes." UVM's president, Calvin Pease, accepted the deeds on behalf of the university. And according to the deeds, Wheeler and Bingham each received $1,000 for the land. The parties' intent was clear. The summit was to be preserved in its wilderness state, except for the construction of buildings needed by the university for scientific or observatory purposes. No timber, trees, or undergrowth could be cut down, burned, or used for any other purpose. In addition, the summit was to remain available to visitors, including Bingham's hotel guests and other members of the public. This was certainly a good deal for Bingham and his partners. They received $2,000 for the land and the assurance that no competing hotel would ever be built on the summit. They also received assurance that the summit would remain in its natural condition for the continued enjoyment of their summit guests. But why did the university, an educational institution, agree to such a deal? $2,000 was a substantial amount of money in 1859, especially for land on a mountaintop that could only be used for very limited purposes. Indeed, half that amount, just $1,000, could purchase a house and lot in Burlington back then. Moreover, the university was experiencing significant financial problems at the time. In 1857, just 2 years earlier, there had been a major financial panic throughout the U.S. And at the time it purchased the summit, the university was so far behind in its bills, it owed its professors and staff over $6,000 in unpaid salaries. So in light of these circumstances, the university's decision to purchase the summit in 1859 is surprising. The decision also appears to have been unprecedented. Never before had an American educational institution or governmental entity purchased or set aside wild land for the purpose of preserving it in its natural state forever. The federal government did not give Yosemite to the state of California until 1864. The first national park, Yellowstone, was not created until 1872. The Adirondacks of New York were not declared forever wild until the 1880s. And the White Mountains of New Hampshire did not become a national park, national forest until 1918. The individuals at the University of Vermont who spearheaded this acquisition of the Mansfield Summit were ahead of their time. While the deeds clearly establish what the parties intended to happen in September of 1859, they do not explain why the university would agree to pay $2,000 to purchase a mountaintop, or why the university would promise to preserve the summit and its vegetation in their natural state for posterity. Yet the deeds are the only writings the parties created to document the transaction. There was no public announcement or press release issued, and the records of the Board of Trustees make no mention of the acquisition or even that it was under consideration. There are also no documents identifying the individuals at the university who participated in approving the acquisition, other than Pease, who attended the closing and accepted the deeds on behalf of the university. There is one other individual, however, who was probably influential in reaching the decision. He may or may not have actually participated, but in my opinion, he was influential in reaching the decision, and that's George Perkins Marsh. We get a picture of him here? Yep, there's the big fella. So Marsh was a UVM trustee at the time of the acquisition. He was between being ambassador to Turkey and then ambassador to Italy. So he was on the board of trustees, and he's considered today as the father of the conservation movement for his groundbreaking book, Man and Nature. So in Man and Nature, Marsh showed that the ancient civilizations of the Mediterranean had brought about their own collapse by deforesting their hillsides, eroding their soils, pursuing their fishing game to the point of extinction, and otherwise abusing their natural resources. He warned that, quote, "The earth is fast becoming an unfit home for its noblest inhabitant, and another era of equal human crime and human improvidence would threaten perhaps even the extinction of the species." As a remedy, he proposed the following, and this is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, passage from Marsh. As a remedy, he suggested that, quote, "Some large and easily accessible region of American soil should remain, as far as possible, in its primitive condition, at once a museum for the instruction of the student, a garden for the recreation of the lover of nature, and an asylum where indigenous tree and humble plant that loves the shade, and fish and fowl and four-footed beast may dwell and perpetuate their kind." The university's decision to purchase and preserve the Mansfield Summit was in complete accord with Marsh's prescription. Although Marsh would not publish his book until 1864, he had been developing and advocating its core concepts here in Vermont since the 1840s and the 1850s. His views would have been known by his colleagues at the university. The other individual is Calvin Pease, then president of the university. And there's our friend Calvin. So the historical record, as I've discovered it, suggests that Calvin Pease had good reasons to recommend that the university acquire the summit on the terms that it did. At the time of the purchase, a team of geologists was wrapping up an exhaustive 2-year-long geological, botanical, and zoological investigation of Vermont, including Mount Mansfield. In their final report, the geologists noted the wild and romantic beauty of the mountain, and they described some of its interesting geological features, including the physical evidence that they found between the nose and the chin, proving that the summit had been scraped by glaciers during the last ice age and had once been on the bottom of an ancient sea. The geologists also discussed the unusual plants growing on the summit, noting that they were, quote, essentially different from any other vegetation in the valley below. The authors concluded, quote, to the contemplative mind, this is a spot of unusual interest and well calculated to inspire one with reverence. To the student who reads the book of nature, there is revealed a page of instruction on this mountain, unquote. So to a contemplative mind like President Pease, the summit of Mount Mansfield would clearly have been a spot of considerable scientific interest to the university and its students because of the mountain's geological importance and its unusual community of summit plants. Pease would also have agreed with the geologists' conclusion that Mansfield's wild and romantic beauty were a source of emotional and spiritual inspiration for the student who reads the book of nature. Pease was both an ordained minister of the Congregational Church and a student of the classics. He loved the Romantic poets, including Wordsworth. Born in Canaan, Connecticut in 1813, Pease moved with his family to Charlotte, Vermont. I wonder whether Pease Mountain is named after the family. He moved with his family to Charlotte when he was 13. There, according to his friends, he experienced, quote, the scenery embracing winds of Vermont, and, quote, felt the inspiration of nature in her forms of sublimity and beauty. Upon moving to Burlington, he fell in love with Mount Mansfield and its stunning views of Lake Champlain and the Adirondacks. According to a colleague, Pease had, quote, a poet's enthusiasm for nature. His love for lake and mountain scenery never forsook him and was often the glowing theme of his conversation and letters. Pease was not alone in his romantic appreciation of Mount Mansfield. In Vermont at the time, the late 1850s, the romantic landscape painting style of the Hudson River School was ascendant. And in Burlington at the time, the most popular disciple of that style was Charles Lewis Heide. According to art historians, quote, Heide's many images of Lake Champlain, like those of Mount Mansfield, reflect a set of attitudes regarding the power of uncivilized nature to teach lessons of high and holy meaning. One of Heide's finest paintings was Mount Mansfield, which he painted in Underhill around 1857, and in which he captured the mountain's, quote, wild, uncontaminated state of primeval nature. One of my favorite images. From the University of Vermont, Pease enjoyed an unimpeded view of Mount Mansfield. That's what he saw from here, as it rose dramatically to its full height out of the Pleasant Valley Plateau, 25 miles away in Underhill. Pease would have recognized the power of Mount Mansfield to teach lessons of high and holy meaning, not only to Victorian painters, but also to his students here at the university. Hence, Pease and his colleagues had good educational reasons to recommend that the university acquire the summit on the conditions that it did. First, the summit contained important geological evidence, as well as a 250-acre community of unusual plants that would probably be of considerable interest to the university's natural history students and professors. Second, Mansfield's wild beauty and surpassing panoramic views had the power to inspire reverence and to teach students lessons of high and holy meaning. The purchase also satisfied George Perkins Marsh's ecological concern that natural resources be conserved as, quote, a museum for the instruction of the student, a garden for the recreation and lover of nature, and an asylum where indigenous plants and animals may dwell and perpetuate their kind. So motivated by a love of nature and a recognition of Mansfield's beauty and scientific interest, the university, through its leaders, decided to purchase and preserve for us a natural resource of great local importance, something no one in this country had ever done before. Thanks to their decision, the Mansfield Summit is still wild, and its tiny remnant of Ice Age tundra still thrives. In addition, thanks to the precedent they set 165 years ago, hundreds of thousands of acres of scenic and ecologically important forest land in Vermont are now under protection of governmental agencies and nature conservancy trusts. Today, Mount Mansfield is the most frequently visited mountain with 40,000 visitors a year, and its summit ridge has been declared a state natural area and a national natural landmark. Throughout this country, there are countless natural resources too small for the federal government's notice, but of great importance to the people, plants, and animals living there. Calvin Pease and his colleagues have shown us that thoughtful people with foresight and fortitude can take matters into their own hands and, with the aid of stable local institutions, preserve for posterity the precious natural resources in our own backyards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. The number of times in the past since that article has been out, almost a year ago now, the number of times that Josh and I have pontificated, if every time you opened a conservation book in the US and it said Yosemite, 1864, Yellowstone, 1872, and Mount Mansfield, 1859, just how amazing that would be, putting the incredible work of conservation that has been done in Vermont on the map at a US-wide scale. So thank you for elucidating that. Our next speaker is Dr. Sarah Helms-Cahan. Dr. Sarah Helms-Cahan is an evolutionary ecologist interested in how physical and social environments shape evolution, the evolution of organismal traits, oftentimes with ants as her model species. She received her PhD in zoology at the University of Arizona. Currently here, she holds so many titles, I'm going to name a few of them: Professor of Biology, the Howard Endowed Professor of Natural History, the Curator of the Zadok-Thompson Zoological Collections at the University of Vermont, and other things as well. Now, the Associate Vice President of Research at University of Vermont. She wears so many hats and yet has some time to talk to us today about some connections that might be possible between the historical collections at the university and the natural areas. So, Sarah, thank you so much for being here.
There we go. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and I'm so excited to be able to celebrate the natural areas and talk about how biodiversity research and conservation and restoration is really a community process. And there are lots of us across this campus, across the state, and across the country who can work together in complementary ways to be able to advance all of our goals to preserve the magnificent biodiversity that we have in the state. I'm here today in my one hat as the curator of the Thompson Zoological Collection. I've been in this role for about 2.5 years, and I joined the collections kind of by accident. but I have fallen in love with them. It's really my baby, and what I'm hoping to convince you today is not only to appreciate our natural areas, but also to think about how many of the entities across campus, including the natural history collections, can help us to achieve our goals. So from my perspective, thinking about biodiversity and living things, I think about the UVM natural areas as really capturing exemplars of Vermont's biodiversity. There's no way to conserve everything in the whole state of Vermont, obviously, but what we can do is try to pick out those areas that are really distinctive and capture the range of habitats and environments, and at least have something, a small piece, that can be that focal model system where we can really try to understand the whole, and know what we have so that when we are trying to advance biodiversity goals elsewhere, we have a baseline with which to understand what's possible. So in any of those places across Vermont, be it a peak or a bog or a lake or a forest, we have an exemplar in one of our natural areas. And I've just put here some of the incredible diversity of habitats, and then some of the really charismatic and wonderful organisms from the large to the small that you might find in a place like that. But just having a natural area, if we really want to understand all of this, is not the only thing that we need. There actually needs to be a research ecosystem in addition to the natural ecosystem that we are preserving in the natural areas. So what I've put here is my idea of what that ecosystem really needs to be. If you want to understand and conserve and restore biodiversity, the natural ecosystems that we are investigating, the natural areas are there at the top and they're in red, but they are supported by all these other players. You need to have a record of the organisms that live there, and that's that physical specimens, which is of course why I am here. You need to have the detection and identification tools to be able to monitor and find out what it is that we have and track those things through time. You have to have the analysis and the modeling tools and expertise to be able to make sense of the data that you are generating. You have to have field experiments to go from understanding patterns to understanding process. And then you have to be able to manage all of those data. It's a very daunting task because, of course, this is just a process of accretion. You never lose data out the other end. If you do, you're not doing it right. So it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and so we have to have the infrastructure to be able to manage all of that we are collecting. So I'm going to focus, of course, on physical specimens. And a great thing about the physical specimens at the University of Vermont is, in fact, the entity that manages those physical specimens, the UVM's natural history collections, actually predates the natural areas, and in fact even predates Concord Woods by just a few years. So we are fast approaching our 200th anniversary. The Natural History Collections were founded in 1826 as the College of Natural History. And it really serves as a biorepository for life's diversity in Vermont and beyond. We're not just a Vermont set of collections, but although we specialize and have a really large collection of Vermont's biodiversity. And the history of the collections owes its life to the main drivers in each of the parts of our collection, going back first to the mid-1800s to Zadok Thompson, for whom the zoological collections are named. He was the Vermont state naturalist, the author of Natural History of Vermont, the first treatise about the life and natural landscape of Vermont. And you can see him here on the left. Followed by Cyrus Pringle, who was a preeminent botanist in the mid to late 1800s, and was a particular expert on the plants of Mexico, and had the largest, I think, private collection, herbarium collection of specimens in the world at the time of its donation to the University of Vermont in 1902. And then finally, George Henry Perkins, who was the Vermont state geologist a little bit later in the early 1900s, and later the Dean of the Arts and Sciences here at UVM, and was responsible for being the driving force for a magnificent building to house our museums of all kinds, including natural history, and that's the Fleming Museum in 1931, I believe. So we've been around a long time, as have many of our natural areas under the auspices of UVM. And so I was first interested when approached to do this talk to find out how long has our relationship actually been? How old are the specimens that we have from our natural areas? So I thought to go to Mount Mansfield as a place to do that. So I went back and looked at everything that we have cataloged, which is not 100% of our collections, to find out what's the oldest specimen we've got. I started with insects because, as you heard, insects are my job, my research focus. And so here's the oldest one that I could find, a representative of Bombus vagans, the half-black bumblebee, collected in 1941. And I hope you see the beautiful old script that says Mount Mansfield in cursive in 1941 in the label of this bee. So very impressive, 1941. Then I went to the vertebrates. And here is a northern short-tailed shrew, possibly even cuter than the bee, although not by very much. Collected in 1935, and you can see again the beautiful old tag indicating its provenance from that time. So that was great. We moved back to the 30s, and then I hit the Pringle collection, and we got blown out of the water. And so this is a tea-leafed willow specimen that was collected in 1878, and specifically says summit of Mount Mansfield. The relationship between the collections and our natural areas go back quite a long time. There we go. Wonderful. So what does that really do for us? How can this partnership actually tell us things? Well, one of the great things about having a natural area is it's a place that is open and available to you if you want to do really intensive studies. And one way that you can do that is do a biological inventory. Go out with some way of approaching surveying or inventorying the life that is there. Do that in a standardized way, and then report everything that you find. And there have been many of those over the years. Here's one that I focus on just because I'm really, really hoping to be able to redo this in the next few years. Here's one by Boone et al., Insect Diversity on Mount Mansfield. Actually did a transect going up the mountain let's see, what does it say, 1992. It was actually repeated a number of years later. And I've just shown you a couple of tables from that report showing all of the different plant species that were found in the approach to inventory that they were doing, and then some big groupings of the insects and non-insect invertebrates that they captured using pitfall traps at that time. So that's really great. That gives you a snapshot in time. But I think what's even more important with regard to the natural areas is that by preserving those ecosystems exactly as was described, preserving it in perpetuity, it gives you the opportunity to go back to exactly that same place and do it again. And not only be able to look at changes through time, which I'll show you in a minute, but also allow you potentially to be able to rediscover things that you thought might have been lost. And so here's just one wonderful example of that. This is the purple crowberry in Petrum nigrum. The specimen that I'm showing you from the herbarium was from 1907, so a year before the last sighting of this plant up on the summit of Mount Mansfield. Thought to be gone until it was rediscovered by a hiker many, many, many years later, not too long ago. And the only reason that this, from that time, from the early 1900s to now, that it could be there, sort of undetected and waiting to be rediscovered, is that there were no changes on that landscape so fundamental as to displace it from wherever it was that it was hiding. It's that conservation of the land that allows for the conservation of a species like this. So that's really thinking about it in time, but I think the relationship is reciprocal between the collections and the natural areas. So natural areas can help us as collectors and biodiversity researchers to think about things through time, but collections can also provide the larger context in which each of our natural areas operates, because they're not living in isolation, they're affected by everything that goes on around them, and they are connected to everything that goes on around them. The organisms that live in Shelburne Pond, for instance, which is where these two damselfly and dragonflies were collected from, that's not the only place where they live. They're not the Shelburne Pond dragonfly. They are a dragonfly that has a much larger range. And thus what happens outside has an impact on what happens inside. And the reverse can also be true. And so by using the larger collections that we have in our collections and then others across the world, we can provide some context as to the important drivers of the abundance, distribution, and persistence of those species that occur in the natural lands. And I've just pulled here some maps from the Biodiversity Data Explorer from the Vermont Atlas of Life, which is run by the Vermont Center for Eco-Studies, which takes historical collections data in addition to other data and produces maps like this as to where these two particular species of damselfly and dragonfly collected from Shelburne Pond, where they have records of occurrences. And so you can see they differ a bit in how widely they're distributed across Vermont. And there may be other species that we might collect there that would have even a different distribution from this. So we can identify and prioritize what it is that we want to research based on data like these. And by returning again and again, the natural areas can reveal change that we might otherwise not notice. If you do this kind of work and you're always out there and you're always asking what's there and where does it occur, you might not know what the patterns are that you're looking for. But just by having those data, you're able to detect patterns going from the distant past to the present that can indicate what's most important for you to work on in the future. What I've shown in the center here is a pie diagram of the Centennial Woods insects that I pulled off of our own database, our catalog database. Centennial Woods is a place where students go to collect insects for their field zoology class or their entomology class. Very often, we tend to have a lot of them. This actually isn't all of them, but they're the ones that I could access easily. You can see a lot of different insect groups. And I've focused in on Hymenoptera, so that's the ants, bees, and wasps. Of course, bees are really important pollinators. And then I took a look at the number of families of Hymenoptera that we have in the collection from those student collections from the 70s all the way up to the 2010s. And I think probably doesn't even take that much squinting to see that students who are collecting in Centennial Woods have been progressively collecting a more simplified pollinator community in Centennial Woods over the years. So over in the 1970s, you see a lot of different colors on the pie diagram, and they're pretty evenly distributed across things. And if you come all the way over to the 2010, you'll see there's fewer of them, and they're more biased towards certain groups and not others. They're much less evenly distributed. So even just in this very, very limited data set, of course, they were not out there thinking, I am going to be determining patterns like this. I'm not going to be documenting changes in pollinator diversity, but we can see it. It just emerges from that activity, the combination of education and research that, because we preserve all that information, is something we can use. Now, you might ask a follow-up question in the modern digital age, which is, do we actually need physical specimens anymore? This is something that you could do not by pinning insects, but going out and using your phone, taking a picture, putting it up on iNaturalist. The physical specimen data actually is dwarfed 5 times over by iNaturalist digital sightings. What I would argue is that, in fact, we do need physical specimens, and they are of continuing importance and can be leveraged again and again. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. The first is when something really terrible happens, we can go back in time and ask questions of those specimens in a way that we didn't even know we were supposed to do before. So the example that I've put up here are a couple of different amphibian diseases. So ranavirus on the top. I'm not sure if you can see the little red on the face of the frog. So this is a disease that can ultimately spread and kill this frog. And then chytrid fungus is a worldwide amphibian pathogen that is leading to a global loss of amphibian diversity and abundance. So these appear in environments at a particular time. So ranavirus appeared in Vermont in 2011. No one ever thought to even look for ranavirus before, and iNaturalist doesn't actually tell you if there was a ranavirus pathogen in that frog that you took a picture of, but the physical specimen can tell you. And so we have physical specimens in fluid collections in ethanol going back to the 1950s for amphibians. And there's a graduate student in the biology department right now who's going back to those specimens and actually testing them so that we can find out how early did the ranavirus actually appear in Vermont before it was noticed by somebody because of the pathological signs. So that's a really valuable thing in an era of pandemics of all sorts and zoonotic diseases, to have this resource to be able to go back. And so that's really critical. And then finally, technology is improving all the time. And so we can think forward about how we use both our physical specimens and our natural areas where we collect those specimens to understand both the past and the future. And one of these areas that that technology is going through leaps and bounds is in genetics. So every living organism carries a record of its past and the past of its population and the past of its species, going back on a whole variety of timescales from very shallow to very deep time. And every one of our specimens in the collections has that. And so we can, by going back to the physical specimens, document or investigate what happened over time to the species that suddenly blinked out, that we no longer see. We had no idea we were going to be needing to look at them before. But now we might want to understand, why is it that two of these native lady beetles, the parentheses beetle, and you can see why, because of the pattern on the left-hand beetle, that's why it's called the parentheses beetle, because it has a parentheses on its back, and the convergent beetle, two native lady beetles, were last seen in 2021 and haven't been seen since. The glacial lady beetle hasn't been seen since 1997. The 13-spotted lady beetle hasn't been seen since 1985. But we have samples from Centennial Woods going back to the 1970s at least. And by using those samples and now using that new technology, we can start to understand what led to their decline over time and the extent to which population sizes have gotten smaller gradually, or were fine until some sort of crash impacted them. And you can do exactly the same thing with regards to species recovery if we start to see things coming back. Are they coming back in numbers, but they're not coming back in the genetic diversity we need? These are things we can answer. So I hope that I have convinced you that there is lots to be learned by partnerships between the natural collections and the natural areas. And I am looking forward to another 50 years of partnership in biodiversity research and conservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next speaker is Alicia Daniel. Alicia is the director and founder of the Vermont Master Naturalist. After 30 years of teaching at UVM in the Field Naturalist program, Alicia launched Vermont Master Naturalist program to advance conservation, build community, and connect Vermonters to the wild heart of places. Since 2016, Alicia has been partnering with the UVM Field Naturalist alumni, the Vermont Master Naturalist graduates, field scientists, local conservation leaders to establish chapters in towns across central Vermont and the Champlain Valley. In 2024, there are now over 400 program alum. And I will say that since my time coming to UVM, the number of times I've asked students what their favorite class was, and they say, oh, Alicia Daniel taught me this class, winter ecology, or whatever it might be, is many, many times. She was an amazing teacher here of our students. She's going to give us a story about some natural areas history and support provided by Dr. Hub Vogelman as well. So Alicia, thank you very much for being here today.
Show and tell on it. Thank you, Brendan. I was given permission to use this mic. Yeah, that seems to be working. All right. So I'm delighted to be here with all of you. Let me get set up here for a second. So as Brendan said, I've been invited to talk for, Josh told me 10 minutes about Hub Vogelman and his role in conservation in Vermont, and specifically to the UVM natural areas. Those of you who know Hub know that nobody in their right mind would even attempt that, to talk about him in 10 minutes. I did go to do a little research on him. I've known Hub both as a field naturalist student and as a lecturer in first the botany department and then in plant biology. But I decided I'd check in and see if, sort of freshen my memories of the kinds of things that Hub had done. And I did take a few notes. And unfortunately, since I only have 10 minutes, I can't talk to you about his research on high elevation forests and how that led to their protection through Act 250. I can't dive into his acid rain research and how that built and strengthened the Clean Air Act. I can't talk to you about his founding of the Conservation Fund in Vermont. I can't talk to you about the Vermont chapter of the Nature Conservancy that he also founded. I also can't even really touch on the UVM Field Naturalist Program. But I do know there are field naturalists here today, so if you're here from the Field Naturalist Program, or if you are a Vermont Master Naturalist, would you just raise your hand? Yeah, so Hub made a difference in all these lives. And so let's talk about the UVM natural areas. How many of you knew Hub Vogelman? All right. So the gray beards, me, the people in the front. I want to give you just a minute to think about Hub, and then I'm going to count to 3, and I would invite you to shout out one word that describes Hub Vogelman. So here we go. Please participate. 1, 2, 3. I hear wise. Generous. Dedicated. Excellent. Well, I'm going to talk for a minute, because I did know Hub. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him as an outdoorsman, which I think is also a very important word to describe him. I liked all the ones that people shouted. You knew Hub was an outdoorsman the minute you saw him, and it had to do with the way that he dressed. When I first met Hub Vogelman, and he was taking the field naturalists out to do research into plant communities, he would wear this green coat. And it had been filled with down. But by the time that I met Hub, it was just kind of essence of goose. Like when he raised his arms, you could see right through the coat to the forest beyond. And coats don't get like that hanging on the chair at faculty meetings. Coats get like that when you wear them outdoors, which is what Hub did. The other key piece of evidence that I will present is that he was an ice fisherman. It's easy to be outdoorsy on a beautiful day and walking through the woods when the bugs aren't bad. It takes another level of grit to sit on a bucket in freezing cold weather and stare into a hole waiting for fish to bite. And I had the honor to do this with Hub, and I only did it once. How many of you have been ice fishing? All right, I would say you can all call yourselves outdoors people, because that is a high bar. I'm not trying to say that nature was Hub's greatest love, because Tom Vogelman is here in the room. But I will say that he had a great love of nature, and I think nature fueled his work, both in helping establish the Natural Areas Program and in all the ways that he contributed to conservation in Vermont. By the time we are now celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Natural Areas Program, so in 1974, I'll do the math for you, the trustees at the University of Vermont established the Natural Areas Program. By that time, Hub had been working on identifying and defining and describing natural areas in Vermont for over a decade. So he had been hard at work on this topic. He wrote 2 works on this. I wasn't allowed to bring them because they're in special collections. I can't check them out, but they look something like this. They didn't look like a lot, but they listed and described areas that he thought were critical to conserved in Vermont, and they had at least 7 out of the 10 current UVM natural areas on them. So that it's been 60 years since that happened. I'd like to talk just for a minute about Molly Bog. I'm not allowed to say much. Molly Bog is a secret. I will tell you that if you go into Molly Bog without express permission, you will never come out. So don't even try it. But the reason I want to mention it is this beautiful bog. You saw the picture of it, open water, moving, quaking mat, carnivorous plants, really an exquisite landscape that UVM stewards. Molly Bog was one of 4 forested wetlands that are in close proximity. They're part of the Molly Bog wetland complex. And they all developed when chunks of ice were buried in glacial outwash 13,000 years ago. And Molly was conserved. But one of the other 4 bogs was not. And it was logged and ditched and drained and converted to pasture in the late 1980s, just moments before, 2 years before any wetland protection acts had been passed. It stayed a pasture for less than a year. And by logging and ditching it, the owner created this cascade of hydrologic and ecologic effects that continue through today. It's now a destroyed bog. It's a failed pasture. And it is a very uncommon wetland beaver complex because it has some characteristics of a bog. But Hub knew this could happen. This was the thing that Hub worried about. And this is what fueled his passion and his work, was to save these natural areas and protect them for going forward for future generations. So I want to give Hub's work a little context. I do want to dive deeper into another natural area, which is Shelburne Pond. But before I talk about that, I want to share a revelation that I had when I was in special collections looking through his old documents. It was part of a definition that Hub wrote, and it said, to qualify as a natural area, it must be a unique area in that biotic communities represented, such as bogs or marshes, were typical ecological units. And it just dawned on me. He was doing this work without the benefit of a natural communities definition. Ecological units? This was hard. He knew what he was looking at. He knew what he was looking for. He knew what needed to be protected, but it would be another 25 years before someone helped give him the language. And that person initially was Liz Thompson. This document came out in June of 1989, and she defined, for the first time, natural communities. So she would then go on with other help to publish them in an expanded form, and then later, and Hub didn't live to see this one, in an even bigger version. This was what Hub needed. This was the Bible of how to talk about conservation. And he helped give rise to it. Liz was a student of his. So Ethan Tapper, where are you? Define natural community for me.
An interacting assemblage of organisms, their physical environment, and the natural processes that affect them.
Did you all hear that? Yes. I called on Ethan. He's one of 4 people I know who can reliably recite that definition. And can you tell us, Ethan, why is it? It's not just the plants and animals. What else is it? What's interesting about it?
It's everything. It's inclusive of all the pieces and parts of that living community and how they change.
Perfect. So the other 3 people I know who can do this are the authors of this book. So Ethan does deserve your applause for that. Yeah, go Ethan. So now I can read you a description of Shelburne Pond that appeared in Places to Walk, Paddle, and Explore in Vermont. This was the 50th anniversary of the Nature Conservancy. And this is the first natural area that is in this book, and that's not an accident. They're very, 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 very proud of this place. There is an impressive habitat diversity at Shelburne Pond for students to study and visitors to enjoy, with 30 of Vermont's natural communities exhibited in a relatively small area. In a regional context, says Rick Paradise, this 1,046-acre site is a biological hotspot. Among the most memorable annual events there is the too brief effusion of spring wildflowers, especially the carpet of white and painted trilliums that can be seen from the Loop Trail. Bloodroot, hepatica, spring beauty, squirrel corn, Dutchman's breeches, wild ginger, and blue cohosh are also found in the rich woods and near the limestone ledges and outcrops. How many of you have been to Shelburne Pond? Yeah. Have you been there in the spring to see the wildflowers? Yeah. Hub used to take classes there, and that was the first time I ever went there to sample the wildflowers, and he was really interested because it had been a pasture, but it was a rocky pasture, and there were still a lot of wildflowers there. And taking us up on this little hillside and watching the woods come back, watching the trees grow up around these flowers, and kind of noticing what was happening as that happened. So he also, they further honored Hub in this book with a story about how he helped acquire Shelburne Pond. Shelburne Pond is one of the landmark success stories of land protection in Vermont, declares John Benhammer, the Nature Conservancy's Director of Land Protection. Without early action by the Conservancy, the pond shoreline might be lined with vacation homes, cabins, and camps. Vermont chapter co-founder Hub Vogelman and the University of Vermont set their sights on protecting Shelburne Pond in the 1960s and launched an ambitious fundraising campaign. One breakthrough came when Hub brought H. Lawrence Achilles, heir to the Kodak fortune, to see the pond. The frail, nearly 90-year-old Achilles was eased into a captain's chair on a small boat, along with a basket of fried chicken, cheese, and wine. Achilles waved enthusiastically to anglers on the pond. He never stopped smiling, declaring it one of the happiest days of his life. "Hub, you can call this a pond, but I call it a lake." So he was super impressed by what he then went on to donate a lot of money to conserve, which is why it is called the H. Lawrence Achilles blah, blah, blah. Natural area at Shelburne Ponds or whatever. So I just want to close in my last couple of minutes with a story about Hub. Hub changed my life. He trained me through the Field Naturalist program to be a naturalist, and I went on to teach, to mentor and train naturalists through the Field Naturalist program and also through Vermont Master Naturalist. But this isn't a story about that. I need to find one prop, and I'll tell you the story. This is important. I don't want to lose that. So I would, on occasion, go to Hub's farm. He'd have special events there, and I would go there with other people. And I showed up one time, and I was in kind of a dejected mood. It was this time of year. It was almost exactly this time of year. And in the winter, I make elk hide rattles. And I had missed the window of opportunity to get corn, flint corn, to fill the rattles. And I was searching everywhere, and I couldn't find any. I stopped at Arcana on the way to Hub's house. They had the only flint corn they had for sale was in seed packets, which was going to be exorbitantly expensive. So I just couldn't crack it. I couldn't crack the problem. So I went in, and one of the first things I talked to Hub was about my quest to find flint corn for my rattles. And he goes, "Oh, I have some of that." And I was like, "Well, yeah, a lot of people do this time of year. They have a couple of ears they hang on their door." I was like, "Well, thanks, Hub. Yeah, I'd love some corn." He took me back into a room, and it had a solid glass wall. and was full of the most exquisitely gorgeous and beautiful plants. And he pointed up in the rafters, and hanging from the rafters were like hundreds and hundreds of ears of corn that he had grown and he was drying. And he just starts pulling them down. He got a long stick with a hook on it. He starts taking them out of the rafters and putting them in my backpack. And I left his house. It was such abundance, such richness, made me so happy. And this was Hub. Hub was generous, and Hub was kind, and he was wise. He was a rainmaker. He could make conservation happen. He was also a dream maker. He could make your dreams come true. There was a real magic about him as an individual. And I feel very lucky to have known him. So let's hear it for Hub Vogelman and the UVM Natural Areas 50th anniversary. Woo! And the tradition continues. Tom Vogelman brought me corn that he grew. Thank you, Tom.
I also tried to take that book, Vermont Natural Areas, out of the special collections and was denied. So I don't know who would have got it first, Alicia. I tried my best. So we just heard about the inspirational and foundational work of Hub Vogelman, and in that book, Vermont Natural Areas, 7 of our natural areas became natural areas because they were outlined by Hub. And Josh, this is really Josh's idea, but we wanted to pay homage to that work that Hub did. And so we have raised funds and are continuing to raise funds for the Hub Vogelman Student Engagement Fund. And we'll put this out the first call will be in the spring, and it'll be focused either towards field naturalist students or our undergrads who are engaged in research or projects in our natural areas and connecting with state strategies. So starting this spring, we will have our first Hub Vogelman Student Engagement Fellow. And just to say a few words about his father, I want to introduce Dr. Tom Vogelman, scientific force in his own right. He was the Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, the Director of the Vermont Agricultural Experiment Station at the University of Vermont, Professor and Chair of the Department of Plant Biology. His work specialized in plant physiology. He's published close to 100 papers and on plant growth and photosynthesis and development, and here to say a few words about his father. Thank you very much, Tom, for being here today.
Well, thanks, Brendan. I don't know where you got all that stuff. Anyway, it's an honor to be here. I'm the eldest son of the family, and I'm really delighted to see so many students in the audience. So hopefully what I have to say will provide a little bit of guidance as you move forward. So I'm only going to speak for about 3 or 4 minutes. My remarks are going to talk about some of the early years here at UVM, the development of professional relationships, and then finally the ability to network with people who knew how to buy land. So I'll start with the early years. Hub Vogelman came to UVM from the University of Michigan in 1955 as an instructor in the botany department. The chair of the department at that time was Jim Marvin, who from the start got my father involved with conservation efforts across the state. One of his first assignments concerned the natural area at the top of Mount Mansfield. The year was 1959, and the Cold War was in full play. The top of Mount Mansfield had been surveyed for the installation of an all-weather road, and a good chunk of the top of the mountain was to be blasted away for the installation of nuclear-tipped Bomark missiles. Hub's assignment was to provide advice to the Army on, get this, on how to minimize damage to the tundra while doing the construction. Fortunately, within months of the start, when the bulldozers were supposed to start, the project was canceled because the missiles were deemed obsolete. Now, I note that the concept of stewardship of the top of Mount Mansfield has evolved since that time. Hub rapidly gained knowledge about the many natural areas in Vermont, and a key part of his stewardship came from his long involvement with the Bird and Botanical Club and other similar societies, where he developed close personal relationships with other people who cared deeply about natural areas. These clubs would sponsor tours of the natural areas, accompanied by lectures from my dad. It's important to note that some of the members of these societies had financial means. Some are good amateur botanists, and some simply like to stump my father, the professor, by finding a plant that was miserable to identify. He was a bit of a showman, and he was good at spotting a plant that would give him trouble. And one solution was to start his lecture, draw attention away from the offending plant, and then step on it so nobody could see it. Other times he wasn't so lucky, and he would be presented with a plant that he didn't know. It was usually a yellow-flowered member of the aster family. And his response would be, "Wow, you found something special. It's a gardenia." And after the person would be elated, "Dr. Vogelman says I found a gardenia." Look, see what the spelling is on that scriptwriter. So after many years of involvement with these societies and stewardship of the people who really care deeply about natural areas, set the stage for the next phase, purchase of these natural treasures before they disappear. So the last part of my little speech here is partnership with people who knew how to preserve land. Two key organizations entered the scene to help pave the way for permanent preservation of natural areas. The first was the Nature Conservancy, at that time headed by Bob Klein. The second was the Conservation Fund, headed by Pat Noonan. These people had the drive, knowledge, and skill on how to maximize tax advantages to people who were willing to put down money towards the land purchases and to find matching funding. These legal eagles made land preservation a reality. So in summary, the ingredients for getting us to where we are today and the role that my father played consisted of, 1, extensive scientific knowledge of what makes some places special and worthy of preservation. 2, stewardship of people who cared about these areas. And 3, partnership with people and organizations who knew how to cinch a land acquisition deal. Thank you for the opportunity to share some family perspectives about a rewarding and lasting legacy.
Thank you, Tom. Our last speaker in this section was Becca Washburn, and she unfortunately couldn't make it today. She's the Director of Land Administration and Recreation for the state, and her talk was going to continue on the Hub Vogelman theme about how important his work was for the state natural area system, and also to give some ideas of how UVM's natural areas and the state natural area land system will work together in the future. So stay tuned for that. Maybe at the next symposium, we'll hear more about that. It's time to shift from the history to the next section, but we've been sitting for a while, so if you want to get up and get some water or stretch, I welcome you all to do that right now. I know I needed some of that. Thank you, Christine. So we'll just do this for 1 minute. You're next. I'm about to introduce you. Okay. Feel free to keep standing, but I'm going to introduce our next speaker. This section is better utilizing natural areas as living laboratories for planetary health. Our first speaker is Dr. Walt Pullman. He's the director of the Field Naturalist Program. Walt specializes in natural history, place-based landscape analysis, and education for sustainability. He teaches courses in natural history, human ecology, landscape inventory and assessment, and conservation science. He's the director of the Field Naturalist Graduate Program, serves as a faculty advisor to the Sustainable Learning Community. He's the founder and founding director of Place-Based Landscape Analysis and Community Engagement. He's the co-coordinator of the Greater Burlington Sustainability Education Network. He has won pretty much every teaching award that UVM gives. And he's going to talk to us about opportunities for the natural areas and networking capacity for wider impact, roughly. Right? Thank you, Walt. If we can welcome Walt Pullman.
Thank you, Brendan, and thanks to all the great talks that have already just happened. I'm so glad to be here. I was remembering when I first arrived at UVM, we were celebrating the 20th anniversary of the natural area, so you can do the math. But I've never looked back in terms of using the natural areas. And I was so pleased when Sarah talked about the College of Natural History. This is great to hear because the course that I teach, and I'm hoping, are there any NR 1010 students here? Oh, there's a whole bunch. Oh, I love it. This does my heart good. Because our course is called Natural History and Human Ecology. And President Prelock, you'd be pleased at the title because it really is all about integrating humans and nature from a health perspective. And that particular course really welcomes all of our brand new Vermonters. 300 of them join this class, and we really use Vermont as a classroom studying the social ecological system, and the natural areas are just the centerpiece of the whole thing. And I'm also really honored to be the director of the Field Naturalist Program. I know there's a lot of FNs here today, and also a naturalist program. So it's kind of the vestige of the College of Natural History. It lives on strong in the undergraduate and the graduate level, which I'm thrilled about. And I wanted to start with this picture, and Alicia set it up perfectly with that description. This is hopefully you can figure it out here. It's Shelburne Pond, and this was before the days of Google Earth. Do you remember those days when you couldn't just fly over the globe and pick out areas? I was up in a plane with Ian Worley. I don't know if folks know Ian. He is I haven't heard his name today, but he was seminal in sort of interpreting natural areas, keeping it going. He was a former director of the environmental program. So along with Rick and Tom and Hub was just a major player. I just want to mention Ian today as well. And I put this picture up because if I had to choose one of my favorites, I have to say it's probably Shelburne Pond. I actually had a chance to teach a whole course just about Shelburne Pond because of its incredible geologic, bedrock and glacial diversity are just incredible at this site. Obviously, and as I think Alicia and others have said, the diversity of natural communities, especially wetland communities there, is incredible. And then there's the cultural heritage of this place. This has probably the richest archaeological site in Vermont with over 10,000 artifacts extending back 10,000 years, really traces the history of the indigenous people that have stewarded this landscape for so long and are still a living culture today. And so Shelburne Pond really brings it all together. And I want to mention Hub. Again, the first time I went there was in the spring, this incredible spring ephemeral site that Alicia mentioned. And Hub had us roam around for part of it, this freshly tilled field on the south side. And I'll never forget, within like 10 minutes, I picked up this perfect projectile point. And Hub sort of stewarded me through this, and we found out it was 4,000 years old, and it was perfectly sharp, made of this quartz site that had been quarried on nearby Brownell Mountain. So this all came through to me in this really incredible sense of these natural areas bringing together cultural and natural history together. And I did want to give a title to this, Celebrating 50 Years of Conservation, Research, Education, and Discovery. I love acronym. It stands for CRED. You've earned the CRED 50 years later, natural areas, so congratulations on that. And for just a few minutes, I want to take you on a little tour. In my main role, I'm a senior lecturer in the Rubenstein School. That's where my faculty appointment, and I work in plant biology, directing the field naturalist program. But I'm largely involved in education and community engagement, and these just are featured here. And so I want to, it's been an incredible fall for visiting natural areas. What an incredible stretch of weather, and for that makes my life easier because we're taking field trips every day of the week in this class, and usually right outside here there's a whole bunch of yellow school buses. I feel like an elementary school principal sending them off to natural areas. However, there's also a bus driver shortage, and one fortuitous thing happened as a part of this class, and I'm kind of getting there because in natural history and human ecology, those in the class will recognize we just went through a unit that was really called From Mountains to Lake, and we were focused on really the natural and cultural history of the Winooski River watershed. And so we were trying to immerse ourselves fully in it too. So the idea of getting to the top, the highest point that Robert so beautifully described the history of in 1859, it's still near and dear to students' lives. How we were going to get students from the Aiken Center to the top and back in 4 hours for a lab was the question of the day. And we ran out of bus drivers, and so I was so pleased when Jamie, who's the head of transportation and parking, got involved, and he said, let's take our hybrid diesel electric bus up there, load the students on, and take them up 89 all the way up Route 100 to Stowe. And so they got there with a very small carbon footprint. And then when they got there, here's a key thing. Josh wanted me to mention about partnerships. We're so grateful to the Stowe Mountain Resort and their current owners, Vail, for basically comping us gondola ticket for everybody in the class. That's 305 people if you count all the TAs. This is worth, in dollars, about $10,000. But they gave it to us as a way of getting our students up the mountain. So our students loaded on every day of the week. It was perfect weather. We were lucky. And of course, if you've taken the gondola, you have to get up to the Cliff House. And then that's the last sort of thing. And the students needed to scramble up that last half an hour in order to get to the ridgeline and view back to UVM and to Lake Champlain. I can see it out the window here where they were viewing down to this. And it was, I have to say, a remarkable moment for many students because a lot of them hadn't been up in the mountains in Vermont, and to really kind of do that scramble, it was sort of a challenge by choice. It was a really formative moment for students 30 days into being in Vermont. We do have a number of Vermonters in our class too, but we have a number of out-of-state students who are really excited to do this. So I'm grateful that back in 1859, the students could really take a sense of this being a place that the university is invested in. It was great to hear the history of why. So that's one natural area. I wanted to bring in the Field Naturalist program because, as you know, Hub founded the program as a chance to really bring field sciences together in an integrative sense and communicate about them to the world. And so every year, each of the 6 students gets matched with a master's project. And here, this is Catherine Wessel from 2 years ago. Was so pleased that Josh and others here at UVM and connected with the Green Mountain Club said, we'd love to sponsor a project that looks at changes in the alpine ecology, specifically plants, again, that Robert was mentioning, and what changes have occurred over time as the climate changes. And so mountainous areas are really key for doing this. So Catherine did a terrific job of inventorying, sharing her work that's both used for interpretation, but also thinking about climate change impacts. was really, but so we're really grateful to Catherine for her great work with that. I do want to mention, too, that one of the great things about studying mountains, and you may not know it, but we're right in the center of one of the UN-designated biosphere reserves. There's about 700 of these around the world that have been designated because of their rich biological diversity and also the activities of humans to conserve these areas as well. So we're right in the middle of that. And I look out this way towards the Green Mountains. If you were looking out the other window, you'd be looking at the Adirondacks. All these mountainous peaks come together in a part of the world network of mountain biosphere reserves. I know Rick Paradise has been involved in these as well. This is a really great global network. Again, there are social ecological systems that are really key to understand in terms of planetary health. And so UVM is right in the middle of that, and the whole biosphere region is a key research network as well. And the natural areas are part of it. They're important, and again, this idea that they're learning places for sustainability. That's really kind of the idea. How can nature and the humanity of which we're a part of nature coexist together? And I just got back from the COP16 conference in Colombia, which was the UN's Convention on Biological Diversity, and the theme there was peace with nature. How do we make peace with nature? And biosphere regions are places where we're really looking carefully at that. And the natural areas, I'm just so excited, is a theme as we move over ahead in our next 50 years. Next spot I want to take you is in this sort of mountain to lake thing. Of course, we had to figure out what was happening, how land use impacts water quality. So I think Eastwood's got a little bit of a mention. Potash Brook and Eastwoods in a really kind of developed area. Probably the most developed area in Vermont is South Burlington, lots of impervious surfaces, but there's an incredible natural area in there, Eastwoods. It's true a lot of people walk their dogs there, but it's a really rich place, used and valued by the communities there. The quality of the water in Potash Brook, though, is of concern, and so students in NR 1010, we're all right down there measuring the chemical, the physical, and particularly the biological indicators of the health of the water. And this is combined with the work that the Watershed Alliance is doing, lots of community science coming together to help us monitor these streams over time. And actually, the sense is that the water quality in Potash Brook is improving in some ways, and a lot of that is to do to the community of South Burlington really putting a lot of green stormwater infrastructure, nature-based solutions together in the surrounding watershed to make a difference. So the students are highly engaged with the community in looking at the health at the watershed scale. Finally, I want to bring us right back to Centennial Woods. I was just there with some of the field naturalists on Monday, and I want to bring it home to this because Centennial Woods is so important. Especially during the pandemic, we couldn't take buses anywhere, even if we wanted to, but we used the city as classroom, and I think me, along with several professors, were all in Centennial Woods regularly with our students, and it was just a godsend for that. We'd walk to East Woods, we walked to Redstone Quarry. We didn't quite walk up to Colchester Bog, but we used, I want to say, alongside the UVM natural areas, the city of Burlington, 50% sort of open space is an incredible classroom for our students as well. So the partnership with the city is key. And in this exercise, and I see a bunch of the FNs today, we were basically practicing what Alicia and I teach about all the time, this idea of pieces, patterns, and processes for understanding natural systems. Hub really kind of passed this along to us. And the students here were tasked with observing patterns in Centennial Woods. What do you see going on out there? How do you measure these? How do you use the scientific method to quantify patterns? This is at the root of science, and doing this out in the classroom of Centennial Woods was just fantastic. So it was great to see the students in action using statistical analysis, experimental design to do this pattern quantification. And you'll see Lori Anderson, I see Lori right here, is right there with us as the Natural Areas Manager, thinking about how do we use the scientific method driven by students asking questions that are going to be of importance to management. And it was just a great connection. I think that's, as we start thinking about the future of the natural areas, science-driven management is going to be key, and we have huge opportunities to do that. One person's picture, who was a classmate of Catherine and I'd shown, is Michelle Giles, and she worked closely with Brendan on coming up with a master's project to both inventory Centennial Woods, but also think about accessibility. Who can't really get into these woods? And so she's designed this whole idea of an accessible wheelchair trail that would take you right down to a really cool area that the students were studying, the wetlands. So this whole idea of natural areas being really key for human connection to the land, as well as Sarah so eloquently showed all the biological diversity there that we can monitor through time. And so I want to take you in my last slide back here to Shelburne Pond again. I mentioned, about finding a projectile point. This is a group of early students back when the FN program was founded, actually discovering what they thought was a log on the edge of the bog. They pulled it out, and it was a dugout canoe, that dated back to 550 years. This is way before contact with Europeans, and really kind of takes us into the heritage and the importance of these places through time. And what I want to leave you with is this idea of what I am particularly excited about, a real, I guess I'm supposed to be better utilizing natural areas. One idea that I'm really keen on is this whole theme of what we call recreation ecology. Vermonters, many people move to Vermont, to ski, to hike, to snowshoe, you name it. And but people love the natural world as well. And so how do we bring these together in such a way that our use of places is not overwhelming the nature of the places? And actually, how can we steward these places so that we're enhancing the diversity of life too? So that's really key. I'm thrilled at the idea of UVM students being right at the center of this work, doing research in this area that will inform towns around Vermont and beyond. And I'm particularly excited about our next speaker. I'm going to partly introduce him because Peter Newman's coming up, I think. Am I close to that? Two down the line. Okay. And this whole idea of what could parks, recreation, and tourism really take on as a research topic, and the whole idea of recreation ecology is key. So thanks very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Walt. So from a series of connections to our natural areas in the wider world, we're going to take a deep dive into one of our natural areas. Our next speaker is Dr. Amy Seidel. She was formerly she was the director of the environmental program, and I've taken on her mantle. She's a senior lecturer in the environmental studies program, as well as the society, ecology, and policy program. She's the author of 2 books on climate change, Early Spring, Waking to a Warming World, and Finding Higher Ground, Adaptation in the Age of Warming. She has a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Vermont, master's degree in entomology from Colorado State. She has been a colleague of mine and a mentor of mine on how to teach and engage students at a deeper level. She also has a shelf full of teaching awards, and you'll see that she's a master at that, integrating students into inspiration, as she talks about a program that she co-created here, looking at restoration and sense of place in our very own karst wetland. So, Amy, thank you so much for being here today.
I like going after Walt Pullman. We have the same mic height. Good afternoon, everybody. So nice to see the crowd still here. My name is Amy Seidel, as Brendan introduced. And I'm going to talk today about a new curricular offering in restoration ecology that my co-contributor or co-founder colleague Sherry Morse from the Department of Geography and Geosciences and I created. But I also want to acknowledge my wonderful colleague, Dr. Noelia Barrios Garcia, who's teaching in the fellowship this year. I have learned so much over this last hour. I see myself and others taking pictures of these slides. I can't wait to teach again, but I am on sabbatical right now, so I'm probably more of a sponge than I would otherwise be. So thank you very much for having me. I love this picture because it shows some of our fellows in karst wetland, and I'll be telling you more about how we're using that natural area. But I also love the graphic that you can see, the artwork that's been made by students based on a hen-of-the-wood mushroom species that they found in karst wetland. And we do incorporate art making and the humanities into our program on restoration ecology. So I'm going to be talking today about this new program. And I want to start with a guiding question. First, note that beautiful graphic that our fellows have made. Some of them call it freak, some of us call it wreck, so it depends, sort of tomato out there. But the guiding question that Sherry and I came up with our faculty was this: how do we prepare Earth stewards for a complex world and the ecological and the role ecological restoration plays in it? And as I say, I've learned so much, and I've really appreciated the way in which we've mentioned stewardship and we've embraced this idea of stewardship of the natural areas, given Hub's work, given Tom and Rick's work as well. But what does it mean to help develop the ideas and the feeling of stewardship in our students? So this is a leading question for us, and it's really important through line in the work we're doing. I also want to just acknowledge the Henry David Thoreau Foundation and the Coddle-Leedon Fund, and I'll mention them again later. So I'm going to do three things with my short bit of time up here at the podium. The first is to introduce you to REC, the Restoration, Ecology, and Cultures Group. The second is to link REC to a particular natural area, karst wetland in Heinsberg, Vermont, and we've seen some beautiful pictures of it. And finally, to illustrate how this fellowship and our students in it are capturing and developing these ideas and feelings of stewardship, and then going beyond UVM and working in restoration elsewhere. So here's a picture of karst wetland, not as good, I think, as Brendan had shown us earlier. But let me start by introducing you to this fellowship program. In 2021, the University of Vermont was tapped by the Henry David Thoreau Foundation to come up with a new curricular offering and project for our environmental students and scholars here at UVM. And Sherry Morse and I, who were co-directors of the environmental program at the time, assembled our faculty and said, what kind of attributes and characteristics should go into this new program if we were to be funded? And they really were the following. In a post-pandemic era, students were feeling a lot of social isolation. They had not been getting that peer-to-peer learning and the opportunities to build community in the classroom that other students had before the pandemic. So how could we create a real cohort-based approach to this fellowship? How could we bring a skills-based experiential learning, make it service learning course, so that students were really developing technical skills? You know, many of our environmental scholars come to the University of Vermont and get a lot of abstract and conceptual thinking around the grand challenges like climate change and biodiversity loss. But how can we give them repeatedly opportunities to practice and hone technical skills? How can we integrate the arts and humanities? And the environmental studies faculty have really a groundswell of interest here in helping students access their affective and emotive domain through the humanities. And while neither Sherry or I have a background in eco-art, we did tap our faculty here who do to be guests and experts with us. How do we develop a green workforce? Many of you may be tracking the work that Senator Sanders and others have been doing to get federal funding behind a conservation corps and a climate corps so that young people like I'm looking at right here in the room graduate from their degree programs and go work with conservation groups that are mitigating the impacts of climate change, that are restoring coastlands and wetlands to absorb climate impacts, that are doing the hard work to really prepare ourselves for the impact of these grand challenges. And then finally, it was really clear, especially from Brendan, who obviously has been my colleague for a long time, how can this program utilize the natural areas and bring more students into them? So those were really the attributes and how we came up with this group. So we were funded by the Henry David Thoreau Foundation and have been for 3 years, as well as the Coddle-Eden Fund. And we have located ourselves in the living laboratory of Karst Wetland just down the road, about 20 miles, 25 minutes. And I'm going to describe to you why this is such an excellent living laboratory to teach ecological restoration in. First of all, there are these creatures. These are blue-winged and golden-winged warblers. They are on decline in the state of Vermont because their habitat in Lake Champlain Basin is being affected by the populations of non-native plants, what we've come to learn as plants out of place, or invasive species, this being Japanese honeysuckle among them. And so one of the things our students really think about is the restoration of karst wetlands through the extraction and revegetation of karst by plants that are native to the area, shrubland in particular, including the red osier dogwood. So this is hard work. I don't know how many of you out there could testify to pulling plants like Japanese honeysuckle, but it takes wrenches that are almost as tall as Walt, and it takes a good back. So doing that in teams, doing that with other peers, thinking it through, and then bringing, as Walt mentioned, the scientific method to these ideas. When best to pull them, when best to revegetate, what to revegetate with, where is the source of those plants that we're revegetating, et cetera, all become part of the experimental design that our restoration fellows engage in. But it's not only this restoration work with non-native plants. The students are lucky that karst represents multiple natural communities, and thank you, Ethan, for that definition earlier. These are uplands, these are cattail marshes, fallow fields, different types of deciduous hardwood communities. So the students are actually engaging in a range of natural communities and thinking about their restoration, in addition to some of the trails. That dotted line there you see are some of the trail network at karst. We work with a range of partners in karst, including the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, which helps us reestablish trails and develop new ones. Mapping is also a very important thing and technical skill that our students train. We go back to the Beers Atlas that you can see here from the 19th century, but we also think about the ecocultural uses of karst wetland by Abenaki people, present and past. I love the way Walter referred to the artifacts he found in others. While we haven't found any artifacts from Abenaki people, we certainly see a lot of artifact from the agricultural history in karst, including Highland cattle, which has a great story about mad cow disease in the UK and how there was a refuge population here at karst, but other kinds of agricultural relics, including 300-year-old white oak trees that bounded the agricultural plots in karst before we ever arrived. So you can see this is a kind of sampling of the design and execution and planning of restoration that our students do in this 300-acre area that is just an absolute boon for the students studying ecological restoration. This last picture I'm showing you is actually from the summer. We had 4 students working in karst this summer on a new pollinator project. One of the things that exists in karst is a Velco transmission line. Now, Velco has about 700 miles of transmission line in the state of Vermont, and many of us are interested in the pollinator activity below those lines. So we've started to collect data in karst on pollinator and nectar sources so as to develop some best practices for this utility. So in summary, you can see that CARS has tremendous opportunities for our students to study ecological restoration from an ecocultural perspective, from an ecological perspective. It's accessible. This is really important. Thank you, Rubenstein, for the vans to get our students there. And I'll just want to put a little bit of a fine point on that. When students leave campus, they see the world, right? Even if it's only 25 minutes away. They see a new community. They see the Lake Champlain Basin. They meet with land trusts. They meet with conservation commissions. They meet with experts from the Audubon. And that really develops in them a set of network and professional understanding of ecological restoration, but also what this looks like outside of the classroom and outside of Burlington. I just want to pause for a moment and talk a little bit about pedagogy, because as I mentioned, Earth stewardship is pretty much a through line for the REC program. And as Sherry and I get further into the fellowship, we're now in our third cohort, we realize that there's some great theory for us to tap into on the development of stewardship in our young students. I want to mention how in this post-pandemic era and with these grand challenges in front of us, having students engage in restoration becomes quite a positive and optimistic endeavor. And it's in large part because they feel agency, which is this dimension of Earth stewardship. When you enter karst wetland or other wetlands as an ecological restorationist, you feel you are doing something. You are active. You are taking out giant conduits here and restoring the hydrological patterns in a place. This is a very efficacious feeling students have. When you're able to walk into a natural area and know 50 to 100 species of plant, which our students do, that gives you an incredible sense of knowledge of a place. And when your faculty and your peers spend time thinking about the concepts of care and the value of responsibility and accountability as a human alive at this point in time, that deepens your understanding of stewardship and yourself as a steward in this world. And so we really do take a very serious approach to representing each of these dimensions in our restoration fellows so that they might conclude our program with a moral center, really, that is landed in Earth stewardship. A couple of brief anecdotes from those students that allow you to see in their own words what that care feels like. I was surprised by how connected I grew to karst wetland and how it felt like home. This is a very important sentiment in our students because topophilia and biophilia are very strong components of stewardship. I have never felt so connected to land before, and now I feel like I am equipped to care about places deeply. Again, the well-being of our students, the well-being of the landscapes they inhabit, that idea of coexistence is reflected in these reflective exercises and the qualitative data we're collecting on them. The third point I wanted to make is that our students go on to act in this role of ecological restoration and earth stewardship elsewhere. We highly encourage our students after a year of working with us to find positions in ecological restoration. These are sophomore and junior students who have plenty of time to develop their professional skills and knowledge. 85% of our students last year were placed in restoration positions over the summer. We're really excited about that high number, and many of them were with internships with our community partners, including Audubon Vermont, Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, the Northeast Stewardship Center, VYCC, and others. So that movement from our fellowship into positions is really taking place. We also were able to hire 3 additional students to just work in karst to monitor the projects and experiments that their peers had catalyzed, including this really valuable project with Velco and pollination. And finally, we're following our students, our graduates, with surveys and seeing where our students go after they complete their degrees here at the University of Vermont as they look at the world that really is demanding their stewardship skills to face these grand challenges. So in conclusion, I just want to reiterate, I hope you now are aware of this important program, REC, the Fellowship in Restoration Ecologies and Cultures, that you can see where it's come from and why it is so very important that we have natural areas, CARS in particular, to carry out our work and to be our living laboratory, and that the success and the metric of success of our students leaving this program and finding their way into restoration positions is really exciting for us, and a testament to the fact that the natural areas were their launching place. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. So we have one more speaker before our keynote, Dr. Peter Newman. Dr. Peter Newman is the Dean of the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources. He earned his PhD in Natural Resources from the University of Vermont 25 years ago. He's back to his home place. He was also the inaugural Susie and Alan Martin Professor and Head of Department of Parks, of Recreation, Park, and Tourism Management at Penn State University, and the head of the graduate degree program in acoustics at Penn State University. His research focuses on the carrying capacity and decision-making in the context of protected areas management. He has conducted visitor and park recreation research all over the United States in some of the most exciting and biggest named parks that you could think of in the U.S., but also in other places around the world. He's a fellow of the Academy of Leisure Science, and he's going to talk to us a bit about his story, but also his vision for integrating and managing kind of natural areas in our natural ecosystems for the benefits of people and planet. So, Peter, thank you so much for being here with us today.
All right. Well, Brendan said there is no way you're going to do this in 10 minutes, so I'm going to time it. I'm going to make sure I do. All right. So thanks, everyone. You know, it is awesome to be back here at UVM. I am having so much fun relearning, rediscovering things, and today is one of those things, you know, to really see like, oh yeah, I remember these natural areas. I remember all the places that we went in NR1 when I was a TA, and just to see this all again is really incredible and really seeing this history. So thanks for doing all of this today. I'm going to try to make three points here in my few minutes here. And the one is that these places, natural areas and parks, have this incredible ability to inspire. And what I wanted to show, and I'm glad there are students in the audience, is this is me my sophomore year in college. And so I was an intern with the Student Conservation Association, and I was in the Frank Church Wilderness of No Return in Idaho. And it was one of the most incredible experiences I ever had. And it's funny, I think about it now as this idea of the no return is apt, because I never really came back from that, in the sense that this is what I knew I was going to dive into. I was working at a fire tower, I was cutting trail, backing up smoke jumpers who were coming in. It was such an eye-opening experience for me to understand it. And it led me to my next job, which was as a park ranger in Yosemite. And as a park ranger in Yosemite, you really begin to see that balance that Walt was talking about. You know, how do you take 4.2 million people a year and put them in a small place that's super fragile and really begin to balance that use and preservation? And the amazing thing that happened to me there was that I was in the backcountry on a patrol, and I met this guy, and I was talking to him, and I asked him for his permit, and his name is Robert Manning. And we started talking. I said, "Oh, I know that name. I've read your stuff." And that conversation turned into a conversation when I said, "Bob, I want to show you some work that you all need to do here." And so I showed him some stuff, and that turned into a larger conversation. And he said, "You need to come back and do a PhD and do this work for me." And I did. And that's what led me back to Vermont. And that was back in 1999. And it was life-changing. Life-changing because Rubenstein was life-changing for me. Life-changing because I got to work in NR1 as a TA, worked with Wall, and so many faculty who are here today. So it's just an amazing thing to see that return. So point number one, these places inspire. These places help us really launch us into our next places. And they inspire a lot of people. 330 million people visiting our national parks every year. Almost 1 billion visiting our state parks every year. And with that use, just as you were talking about, Walt, there's impact. This was actually a campsite that I worked on not far from where I met Bob in Lyle Canyon. It's both the ecological impact, but this is Half Dome now in Yosemite. There's also the social impact. At what point do things get so crowded that it not only impacts the environment, but it impacts the social experience of the place? And someone who talked about this was Frederick Law Olmsted. Before many years, or if proper facilities are offered, hundreds will become thousands, and in a century, the whole number will be counted by millions. And the injury so slight that it'll be unheeded by any visitor will now be multiplied by millions. He said that in 1865, right? Not very close to the time that these natural areas were created. Think 40,000 visitors on the top of Mount Mansfield every year. These are the kinds of things that we can absolutely begin to study. And that really launched my whole research career in visitor capacity, understanding that balance between things. It was really borrowed from a concept in wildlife, that maximum number of species a habitat can sustain indefinitely. But it really, over time, began to adapt to this concept that there's also this social side to visitor capacity. How does it affect the experiences of a place? What are the essential qualities of a place that use begins to really impact over time? And so that is one of the questions that we can really begin to answer in places, in natural areas. And it gets to this concept: how much and at what types of visitor use can be sustained in an area before the experiences people are seeking are unacceptably degraded, right? And this has murmurings of sustainability, this murmurings of planetary health, this concept of how do we do it all and maintain all these important qualities. I would love to talk a lot about research, but 10 minutes, I know we're doing it. But this is a lab that I began at Colorado State after leaving UVM, and it's the Protected Areas Research Collaborative. And it really started to blossom from that concept of visitor capacity to so many of the things that lead to visitor capacity. The concepts of integrated visitor use and transportation, thinking about education and how that influences behaviors on land. And then really the last several years was really beginning to think about noise propagation. That how does noise from people, from aircraft, we know that here, don't we? From buses, how does that affect both people and wildlife? Because I feel like those are the things that get at some of those feelings of calm and peace we were talking about before. So our graduates have gone on to work for the National Park Service, at universities, and all these places, all thinking about this very issue. And one of the bigger questions that we're beginning to really talk about is this concept of noise propagation. How does noise affect human health? How does it affect the behavior of wildlife? And how does it really all come together to think about developing coupled human-natural systems as we really begin to think of this as in a systemic way? There's noise coming at us all the time from everywhere. This picture is always amazing to me, but it's basically anything in green or mint or blue, right? 40 to 60% or more of that landscape is within 382 meters of a road, right? So we are so close to these places in all the time. And this also happens, well, you know what? Let me see if I can get this. That's not going to go. But aircraft, we hear aircraft all the time. This is a sonogram of was this Yosemite? This is Grand Teton. During one of the government shutdowns, right? Looking at recording. So understanding, what does the place sound like when people are there? What does the place sound like when people are not there, right? So we really are beginning to see the impacts of acoustics on our places. And we know that natural areas and protected areas work. So we work really closely with the National Park Service, who is basically has landscape-wide data on acoustics. If you begin to look at the areas in red, you can begin to see those are our protected areas, right? The Adirondacks are there. We got Yosemite, the Yellowstone, Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And if we honed in I bet we would see our natural areas here. Protected areas work. Natural areas work to protect these places overall. So that was point number 2, that we can do this. This is this balance that's super important, and science can really help inform it if we come about it in a systemic way. And this last point is that parks are really essential for planetary health, right? So our research is now really beginning to expand, and how do we connect natural areas, how do we connect parks to thinking about metrics of human health? So through our research, we've found that parks help, obviously, to protect biodiversity, and associated sounds can improve mood, increase cognitive restoration, and promote stress recovery. We know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, and there was a lot of great work done on this, and we did a bunch of work on this, it highlighted the importance of outdoor recreation, that people wanted to get outside. That was already said here today. I love that. We know that protecting biodiversity is essential for human well-being. We've done experiments on trails where we actually put speakers in the woods, and we actually pipe in different bird calls. That's a whole other conversation. But where we find that people do detect these things, they do feel better when nature sounds are present. And I do believe that parks and natural areas should be part of the public health dialogue even more than they are overall. So natural areas are absolutely vital for planetary health, and they're vital for UVM. And there's been a lot of great work here at the university doing this. I'm realizing that I have to get out my glasses. This happens when you're 25 years away. So UVM grad student Aaron Schwartz and the Gunn faculty found that by analyzing Twitter tweets in the urban natural areas, it increases in happiness from a visit to an outpost of urban nature is equivalent to the mood spike on Christmas and by far the happiest day of the year on Twitter. Rubenstein faculty and undergrads have found that 32% of Chittenden County natural area visitors use nature as a stress relief activity during the COVID lockdown. And this is some guy named Fisher, I think. Gund and Resner faculty found that access to natural areas in poor countries across the globe help to increase food security and reduce anemia in children. These places, and that was my final point, is that they're so vital for public health, they're vital for planetary health, and really such a deep part of what we are and what we do here at UVM. And I'm so psyched to be back here to really tap into this and bring this research back to UVM. There it is. It cut me off. John Muir thought about this stuff too. That was the last line, really. But thanks.
So we'll leave John Muir up while everybody maybe stand up and stretch if you want to. I invite you to do that before I introduce Ethan Tapper, our keynote speaker. Peter, that was amazing. 2 seconds early. I lost the bet. Thank you all for your attendance and attention over the past 2.5 hours. I am delighted to introduce our keynote today, Ethan Tapper. Ethan is a forester, author, and digital creator from Vermont. He is an alum of the Rubenstein School's forestry program and current graduate student. After graduating from UVM, Ethan worked as a consulting forester on family forests and industrial timberland in Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, and Maine, before becoming the Chittenden County Forester in 2016. Ethan advised private landowners, municipalities, conservation organizations, foresters, and loggers on the responsible stewardship of privately owned forest land, managed over 4,500 acres of community forest, administered Vermont's use value appraisal or current use program in the county, wrote a monthly column for community newspapers that reached tens of thousands of people each month, and led hundreds of public events. Ethan left this role to start his own consulting forestry business, Bear Island Forestry, in 2024. He released his book, How to Love a Forest, just recently. He started writing it in 2018 after realizing that there was no book that captured his understanding of what forests are, how they work, and what it means to take care of them. In his book, Ethan asks readers what it means to live in a time when ecosystems are in retreat, and further questions how we can reach toward a better future. Ethan's time as a Rubenstein student and his work with forests, particularly in Chittenden as a Chittenden County forester, and with his consulting company, were major influences on his decision to write this book. This book has been the gift I've been giving for the last 2 months. I think my kids are sick of it, seeing more copies on my bureau at home. It is lovely. It is, I think one of the quotes talks about how this is the modern day Aldo Leopold. The blurbs for the book are right on. Sometimes you read the blurbs, you're like, come on, right on. This is an amazing book. They'll be for sale. We have Phoenix Books here. And I just want to say thank you, Ethan, so much for sharing your time with us, your words, your wisdom, and putting it all in a book that we can carry home with us. So, Ethan Tapper, thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to take mine back.
Hey, I'm Ethan. So surreal being up here, my goodness. So thanks for everybody for coming out here and being here with me and all of us to celebrate UVM Natural Area's 50th birthday. And it's been such a joy to listen to all these amazing people. Very intimidated by these people over here, not going to look at them. To celebrate these amazing lands, their ecology, their history, and the people and the moments that have shaped them into what they are today. I have a special relationship with these natural areas as a UVM alum from the forestry program. You know, we've all had some good times in these natural areas, and I carry perhaps the dubious distinction of being maybe the only one of these esteemed speakers today who has been arrested in one of UVM's natural areas for having a little too much fun. This event honors a storied past of these natural areas, and it's also, we hope, a moment of reinvention and regeneration and a celebration of new life. From this moment, these natural areas are not going to stay the same as they've been forever. They're going to continue to adapt and to evolve, to foster inquiry and understanding, and to help future generations of land stewards build relationships with the precious and irreplaceable ecosystems of this world, and all the species that rely on them, ourselves included. This moment, as I keep telling people, as I get to talk about this book and this vision, is an opportunity, and it's a chance to look forward toward a better world. Since early September, it's been my honor to get to tour around the Northeast talking to people about this book, How to Love a Forest, which is just like super surreal and really weird and really great. And when I get asked what How to Love a Forest is, I say that it's a reimagining of forests and other ecosystems and what it means to care for them. And it's also a love story. And it's a love letter to ecosystems and to biodiversity. And it's a love letter to a world that doesn't exist yet. And it's the world that we can create if we're willing to make all of these tough decisions to engage in this endless and grueling and beautiful process of stewardship. And I think that that is really what these natural areas fostered in me and in everyone that touches them. And this is also a book about hope, because in this world that feels so lost and so hopeless, it has been such a tremendous privilege to get to share this message of how we can and will build this better world, how we will build this more beautiful and abundant future. To invite people to reimagine what we are and where we are and what we're capable of, to reimagine what it means to live in and to love this world, and an invitation to guide ourselves and each other and this biosphere towards something that is so much more. In my mind, that's what we're really celebrating today. As much as we're honoring the past, I believe that we're also looking boldly forward and reimagining how these natural areas can help us build a better future. I want to talk a little bit about my past. So it's a funny thing, like as I get to talk about this book, it's been a neat opportunity to everybody wants to know how I got into this and how I ended up like being a forester, how I ended up writing this book and stuff. And so I, like a superhero, get to have an origin story, which is really fun. And one of the interesting things about it, and one thing that I really like to tell, especially like students and young people about it, is how you just like group together all of these meaningless things you did. And you were just bumping from one thing to the next, and it didn't seem to have, any clear direction, and then it all adds up. And so this is mine as best as I can figure it. So I grew up in this little village called Saxton's River. Anybody know Saxton's River? Hell yeah. It's this little village, 300 people, and it's surrounded by forests. And when you hear these stories of these nature writers or these biologists, ecologists, consistently, right, they're like, I was the nature kid, and I was crawling around the dirt, and I was looking at bugs, and I was trying to catch snakes, and I was tracking deer, and that wasn't my experience at all. And I don't remember caring about forests one bit. What I do remember being very important to me is that I wanted to get out of there bad. And I remember saying when I was a junior in high school to somebody, I don't know where I'm going to college, but I know where I'm not going to go, and that's the University of Vermont. Because everybody goes there, and I'm getting out of here. The first month of my senior year of high school, I got a letter from the University of Vermont that told me that I got this scholarship called the Green and Gold Scholarship, which is this really special scholarship for Vermont residents. It's a full scholarship. And I was like, guess I'm going to the University of Vermont. No principles, no integrity. But even when I got here, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was just like bumping around, doing random stuff, taking random classes. And as I was finishing up my second semester, my high school girlfriend, the first big love of my life, was coming back from this wilderness expedition with this program she had done, taken 5 months. And she had had this like huge, massive, expansive experience. And I had not. I'd just been like dubbing around in my dorm room or whatever. And we weren't connecting, and I was afraid that we were going to break up. And so perfectly rationally, as anyone would, I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going on a wilderness expedition. And the next one left in 2 weeks, and it was a 6-month expedition to ski north for 3 months, and then to build a canoe and canoe back down. Now, in retrospect, I did this for no reason. The relationship didn't work out, but it totally changed the course of my life. And then after that, all I wanted to do was just be in the woods. And I worked as a wilderness guide, and I lived in this like uninsulated yurt with a fir bough floor in the woods of Maine for a year. And I worked with draft animals, did a little bit of draft horse logging. And then I got a letter from the University of Vermont that told me that I had to come back or I was going to lose my scholarship. And I remember sitting on the bow floor of my yurt, holding a paper copy of all the majors at the University of Vermont. And I scrolled down, and I saw forestry. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew that it had the word forest in it. So I said, we'll try that. Obviously, ended up being a really good fit. Now, I remember it was such an interesting experience of studying forestry here at UVM. And I remember these natural areas really clearly. And I remember they were important to us, and they were the sites of so many of our different labs. I especially remember dendrology with John Shane. Shout out to dendrology with John Shane. John Shane lineage. And learning dendrology on the winding trails in Centennial Woods and in those tall pines, East Woods, in that unique ecology of Colchester Bog, where not only is that the location of that northernmost black gum, right? But it's like 30 feet away from probably the southernmost black spruce, which is nuts. And it's a miraculous thing that happened to me, and it happens to many of us, which is that, I'd been just in these forests and really just, felt really in tune with them, but realized that I didn't really know anything about them at all. And it's an amazing thing when you go into these ecosystems. And for most of us, we go into a forest, if we don't know what the different tree species are, it's just like trees, right? And then suddenly you realize that those trees are sugar maple and red maple, that they are yellow birch and paper birch, that they're balsam fir, and that they're red spruce. And every one of those species is habitat for different birds and insects and mammals growing on different sites in different ways, telling us different things about a forest's past, present, and future. It just massively complexifies, if that's a word. Hell yeah. We did it. Our experience of being in the woods. And I remember the same thing happening a decade later, right, when I became a birder, as happens to us all in time, and realizing that my whole life I had just been hearing bird song. And that what that bird song actually was dozens of different species of birds that all wear different colors, that all utilize different nuances of habitats and employ different life strategies and different life histories. And once you start to realize that, you can never go back. So one of the amazing things about studying forestry, and this is no shade on any other discipline, it's just special to me, is that what I say is that, within these environmental sciences, these natural sciences, there are all these subdisciplines, right? And you can be like, a myrmecologist, and you can study ants. And you could be a mycologist, and you can study fungi. And you can be an ornithologist and study birds, right? And you can be a botanist and look at plants. In forestry, you're sort of responsible for all of those things, right? And none in particular. So you're really about that ecosystem, right? You're about that forest. And so you need to know a little bit about all of that stuff, about natural history and about ecology, about hydrology and soil science, about wildlife biology, all of these different pieces and parts that together combine to describe this incredibly beautiful and complex and diverse and dynamic living system. And learning it is so revolutionary because you start to see all of the different relationships between those things and how they actually can't exist apart. You start to see how things like biodiversity, that I think is often misunderstood to be something that's like nice to have. Isn't it so nice that we can go out there and we can see a pretty bird? And you start to realize that biodiversity is the currency of our ecosystems, that it is as important to their function as it is to their beauty. And there's another thing that's really special about forestry, and that's a little bit unique, which is at its core, it's a discipline of action. Imbued in us is this idea that we do not have to be bystanders in these ecosystems, that we can go into these ecosystems that are dealing with these tremendous harmful legacies of the past, countless threats and stressors in the present, and this future that promises challenges like never before. And we can look at them, and we can assess, and then we can do something about it. And I used to think that what that was forest management. And when I advocated for taking action in ecosystems and even doing things as bittersweet as cutting a tree, that I was advocating for forest management. And recently I have realized that that's not what I'm doing at all. I'm advocating for stewardship, which is this constant state of care and relationship with these ecosystems. And at times that involves doing big things, and at times that involves watching and waiting and monitoring. And I think as we think about the future generations of people who are going to be taking care of these ecosystems, that's the ethic that we want to leave with them, is this ethic of stewardship, this ethic that we have a responsibility and a role to play in these ecosystems in this moment in time, and that can be a beautiful and a joyful thing. So I've had my own learning experience that I talk about a lot in the book. And it was on my own land of which I am the steward. And it's this place called Bear Island. And I like to talk about Bear Island because my experience of when I went to it for the first time was that it was the most degraded forest I'd ever seen in my life. Really the perfect forest for me. So the first time I saw Bear Island, my buddy was like, hey, did you see that piece of land for sale in Bolton? And I was like, no, I hadn't. And we looked it up online, and it said 175 acres, Bolton, Vermont, and it just had a picture of Camel's Hump. As if to say, put your mansion right here, and you can look at Camel's Hump. And it's actually not even Camel's Hump, it's what we call Camel's Butt, because you're looking at it dead on, so you can't actually see the Camel's Hump shape. So it's just the butt. And so I was like, I don't know, it's pretty cheap. What's wrong with it? And went to go take a look. So my first impression of this land was the truck road, the access road onto the land hadn't been stabilized properly. And it was washed out. It was a ravine. And I was straddling it with the wheels of my truck, and I rolled up onto this log landing, this clearing that picture had been taken from, and it was covered in trash. Bags of household trash, tires, hydraulic hoses, cables, buckets, pieces of equipment, busted equipment half buried in the ground. And going out from it in every direction, this network of these skid trails, logging trails, with these 3-foot deep ruts just bleed in murky water down the mountain. It was not a very good place to start, but I was like, you know what, I'm here anyway, let's go take a look. So I started to walk up this main trail, and it was really steep. I was getting covered in sweat. I was picking ticks off myself, and I had this funny feeling, and I was like, what's bothering me? Something's wrong. And I kept on walking and walking and walking, and it was about an hour before I realized what was bothering me, which was that there were no healthy trees there. And once I realized that, it was like pretty jarring, and I started to look around, and I was like, there's got to be like a healthy tree here. I couldn't find one. What I now know happened is that 30 years before, the previous owner, this timber company, had, without the supervision of a forester or anything like that, just told these loggers, go cut every tree bigger than 10 inches in diameter on the mountain. 10 inches in diameter, by the way, it's like that big around. And they had done it, and they'd been very thorough. This is a practice called diameter limit cutting, really not a forest management practice, more like extractive practice, like mining, nested within these series of unethical forest management practices that we call high grading. Now, high grading is when you go into a forest and you cut only the most valuable high-grade trees, and you leave those less valuable low-grade trees behind. And the problem with that is that those high-grade trees are also the healthiest trees in the forest, and those low-grade trees are the least healthy trees in the forest. And so what you're doing is essentially managing that forest to be less healthy. And the best analogy for it that I can think of is that it would be like if you went into your vegetable garden in the middle of summer and you just weeded out all the vegetables. That's what this forest felt like to me. And there's an argument to be made that it would have been a greater kindness to this forest, right, if they just cut all the trees. And then at least there would have been enough light to inspire the regeneration of a new generation of trees that would have had a chance to be healthy. So I kept on walking, and even where the forest was trying to regenerate, all of those little plants were being browsed by deer, and I noticed evidence of a deer overpopulation. I slid over these cliffs that bisect the land from west to east and right down into a 30-acre infestation of a non-native invasive plant called Japanese barberry, this tall, pure, no native plants. And I was pushing through that, and I said, forget this place. And I got in my truck and I left. Now, sure enough, over the next couple months, I started to think about it again and again and again. And I started to crane my neck at it, look at it as I was driving by on the highway, and to wonder if that place was actually hopeless, if there was actually nothing that I could do to help it. A couple months later, I went back a second time, and that second time, I started finding all these little beacons of hope. I started finding that there were some healthy trees there, after all, that were just so hidden behind these masses of unhealthy trees that I hadn't seen them. I started to find all these plants that I love, like lowbush blueberry and pink corydalis and red columbine and sweet fern and maple leaf viburnum and serviceberry. I started to find all of these red pine trees scarred by black bears and these rock outcrops covered in reindeer moss with these sweeping views of the Winooski River Valley. And I was standing on one of those outcrops when I said to myself, I'm going to try and buy this place. So I never bought anything like that before. And so I went back and I called my old boss, Mike, who sold forest land real estate. And I was like, Mike, there's this piece of land. I want to put in an offer. How much should I offer? And how do I do that? And he was like, well, let me ask you a couple questions about it. So does it have any timber on it? And I said, no. And he said, any real estate potential? And I was like, no. He said, is the access good? No. Could it be a sugar bush? No. And he kept on going down the line, asking me more and more. I was like, no, no, no. And eventually he said, well, Ethan, this place sounds terrible. Just offer them like nothing, and don't be afraid of hurting their feelings. So that's how I became the owner of this piece of land, Bear Island. And it's one of these things that has been such a revolutionary experience for me, because I had already been working as a forester. I had already been helping other people manage their land. And when it falls to you, it felt different. And it's one thing to believe that all we got to do is just, leave every forest alone and hope that nature takes its course and hope for the best, and that our stewardship requires nothing more from us than leaving it alone, hands off. And it's quite another thing when you're standing on that log landing, surrounded by trash, in a forest with no healthy trees, watching thousands of years of soil roll down the mountain through those skidder ruts. And I had to ask myself if it would be a greater act of care and compassion for this ecosystem to leave it alone, or to do everything in my power to help make it healthy again. And ultimately, my journey since then has been a journey that's about stewardship, right? It's about not just how do we love these ecosystems and how do we care about them, but how do we care for them? And what does that actually mean? And what does that actually require of us? And in my experience, it's required a lot. And it's required, not least of which, is it's required of me that I make all of these compromises, right? And that I make all of these sacrifices, and that I do all of these incredibly challenging things, like cutting trees, like killing deer, like killing non-native invasive plants, all of these things that at the time felt like these just profound weights, and then I realized that what they really were was these profound acts of love. And I think that the goal of UVM Natural Areas for me, and the role that it played for me in my life, was planting that seed, and igniting that spark of what does it mean to love these ecosystems? And we start from this place of just knowing them, right? And knowing more about them, and understanding them, and entering into relationship with them. And then our whole lives, we go off from that moment. And then we get to really figure out what it means to love these ecosystems. So I'm not going to say more about it than that. I do want to do one little reading here. And before I do that, I want to say one other thing, which is that I think in this moment, one of the things that has been one of the most powerful and hopeful ideas in my life has been realizing that my work at Bear Island, as I've been working hard over the last 7 years to transform this ecosystem, I've taught myself to run excavator and restored all those old skid trails and built new, more resilient trails. I've taught myself to be a hunter, and every year try to take as many deer as I can to lower that deer overpopulation. I've cut thousands of trees. And there is, by the way, tangent, there is a parody that I really like in the fact that I know that 30 years ago, these loggers came to my land with these tools, these chainsaws and these skidders, and probably skidders made by this company, Timberjack, from like the late 70s, early 80s, and I know because I've dug pieces of them out of the ground with the excavator, and created all these problems that I'm going to spend the rest of my life fixing. And right now, two of my most powerful tools of healing this ecosystem are my chainsaw and my 1981 Timberjack cable skidder. His name is Red. He's a very good boy. And can it spell timberjack? Basically. And so what I've realized is that as this ecosystem has been transformed, not by leaving it alone, but by taking action, that we're doing something which is much more than mitigation, right? So a lot of times we think of our most lofty objective will be to make sure that the world doesn't get any worse than it is right now, right? And if we could just do that, if we could just make it so that it's not worse than it is right now, we'll be good. And the whole time we're just like bailing out the boat and trying to make it so that, we just stop the bleeding. And I'm not really interested in that at all. And what I'm really interested in is generation and regeneration and building a better world. And at Bear Island and in these other ecosystems that we practice this stewardship on, I think what you'll find is that we are doing much more than stopping the bleeding. We are building something new. We're making them more abundant, more resilient, more of a gift to the future generations of people and to this living world. And it strikes me that this moment, as much as it is also a moment which carries with it fear and uncertainty, is also a moment that in me inspires a lot of hope. So I want to do a reading here, and then I'll be out of your hair. From the end of How to Love a Forest. The storm clouds stamp their feet. They are corralled along the shifting path of the big river, thundering between the walls of the broad valley. The clouds move west, driven like cattle toward the mountains. As empty as it often feels, there is something beautiful about a life lived in the aftermath. Here, in the junkyard of the Anthropocene, we hold the fate of the world, all of its ecosystems, all of its peoples in our hands. In this moment, we can allow this biosphere, our home, to sink further into dysfunction and disarray, or we can make the radical and bittersweet decisions necessary to choose a different path. Inside of this catalyzing moment, we have the opportunity to reimagine our relationship to ecosystems and our relationship to each other, to redefine what we are and what is precious to us. As empty as they often feel, there is something beautiful about a landscape of forests that are just a fraction of their true potential. The forests of our lives are still only at the beginning of their journeys. They may yet become diverse and complex, rich with legacies, ancient again. With our help, these forests may rediscover a capacity for life beyond imagining, an abundance that this world has not known for generations. I pick up another acorn, another product of thousands of years of adaptation and change, another precious thing chained to the legacies of the past and hurtling toward an uncertain future. Perhaps it is doomed. Perhaps it contains endless possibilities. Humidity cloaks the land, drawing tiny round beads of sweat from my skin. For a moment, the mountain is cast in golden light. It smells sharp and strong. As I touch another acorn, a raindrop strikes the back of my hand, rolling between the small bones of my fingers. Suddenly, droplets are stippling the soil like falling stars, throwing up little clouds of dust. I have nowhere to be, and so I kneel, watching the water run around the stumps and the upturned leaves, drawing spider webs on the earth. Someday I will tell my children that the caves in the talus are a womb, the origin of all the black bears on the mountain, and that the springs in the big bowl are the source of all of its waters. Someday I will walk these trails with my children and teach them to reimagine forests as communities of complexity and depth and expansiveness, communities that are fated to change, to celebrate both the miracle of life and the miracle of death. Someday I will kneel beside these stumps, a young forest blooming around me, and teach my children the imperfect truth of what it means to love a forest. Someday I will teach my children that this world is not ours to hold, but that we hold it anyway. That each of us is a steward for one brief and precious moment in time. Someday I will teach my children that despite everything, we are destined to thrive, that we are destined to live in a world that is beautiful. In the years to come, the traces of this moment will fade. This empty patch cut will have become a diverse young forest, the stumps softening and mixing with those of the oaks cut decades ago. I will walk through this young forest and remember this autumn day when my hands were young. I will remember that each tall, perfect oak was once an acorn between my fingertips, that this forest is a child of responsibility, something that we could only have embodied together. No one but me will ever truly know the pieces of myself that I've left on this mountain, the labor of love that being the steward of this land has been. I will know, and that is enough. We owe too much to the future to be imprisoned by the past. As the storm passes over me, I am grateful to be anything at all, grateful to be alive at a time when there is so much worth saving. I want to live in the world that will arise from this moment, the world built by people who are brave and humble and resilient, who make countless bittersweet compromises, who live their lives with the dream of a better world burning in their chests. I want to live in a world that will be created by people planting acorns in the rain. Sometimes this life feels like autumn, the exhausted end of a boundless summer. Today I choose to live in a world in which spring is just breaking, a world that is just awakening, just beginning to discover what it truly is. I look toward the broken ridge of the mountain and feel a powerful nostalgia, not for the past, but for the future. High above the storm, the light is swelling, calling everything upward toward a world that is just beginning. Thank you. After I read that one, I feel like I need to go take a little nappy.
Hello.
Hey.
I'm Olivia. I'm a freshman here at UVM, Wildlife and Fisheries Bio major. I guess my question is, do you have any tips on just how to get started in restoration and stewardship? Because I feel like I have like this drive to do it, but I don't really know how to start doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One thing that I often tell people is that, especially with my previous role as a county forester here in Vermont, being part of this conservation community that we have here, what I often tell people is that there are people and organizations, the best people and the best organizations in the world, that are trying to reach you right now. And as a conservation community, we would always be talking about, we're creating all these resources and all these educational opportunities and all of these things for people to understand things like stewardship and how to get started and opportunities for people to engage with that. And it was just hard to sometimes get people to engage with them at all or to do them. So what I would say is that reach out to these organizations, follow them on social media, sign up for their email list, reach out to them personally if you have specific ideas or questions, and they will tell you how to do it. So organizations, to get you started, right? Any of your local land trusts, the Vermont Land Trust, Audubon Vermont, Vermont Woodlands Association, Vermont Coverts, Vermont Center for Eco Studies. Who am I missing? That's a bunch of good ones to get started with. And all they're going to be so glad to hear from you, because all they've been wanting to do this whole time is just be able to help you figure out the answer to that question. Can I say one other thing, too, about that? I didn't have a chance to incorporate that into this talk, but like, I had a moment recently where I realized that when I was in college, if I had met me now, that I would be intimidated by me, because I would be like, oh my God, and now I just feel like, a ding-dong from Vermont, but also recognizing that I did like write this book, and I know how to do some like cool stuff, like I know how to run excavator, and I know how to run skidder, and I'm a hunter, and sugar maker, and all these other things. And I want to reiterate that all of that stuff is just stuff that I figured out how to do, and not well. And most of the time I spent figuring it out, I was just failing, and persisting, and asking for help, and just like figuring it out. And these things add up. And with the book specifically, I figured out that the time when my brain works the best for writing and is the most creative and productive is the first hour that I'm awake, which for me is 5 to 6 in the morning. It doesn't have to be that time for you. But then I just was like, well, I can't write a book, don't know how to do it. But I can write for an hour. And the same thing on this piece of land. I just had this piece of land that just had everything wrong with it. And I was like, I can't heal this land, but I can like start picking up this trash, and then every one of those little gestures by itself, right, is completely insignificant. One day, writing for an hour, insignificant. Working for a day in a forest like that, completely insignificant. But then you do it again and again and again, and it starts to add up. And that's how basically everything that I've learned how to do, I've learned not by like already knowing how to do anything, but just applying that sort of methodology to it. And I think if we think about it that way, it's amazing the different things that we can learn how to do.
I had a question. Throughout this semester, I've been in a class called Landscape Ecology, and that's been really fun and enjoyable for me. And this is actually an extra credit assignment. I would be here anyways, but I'm really curious how you might connect, kind of similar to the last question, loving such a specific piece of land and specific pieces of land and really stewarding them, and how we might think about that in the context of a whole landscape.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, one thing that's interesting about my work and about writing this book is that, a lot of this book is about individual action, right, on a small scale. But I want to, make it very clear that individual action, like the work that I do on my land or the work that you might do individually on your land, it is meaningful and it has significance. It means something for this land and for the trillions of different organisms that live there, right? And organisms that are going to live there in the future. And, it has significance for each other as it forms a part of these communities. But then we also need to recognize that that kind of individual action alone is not going to do it, right? That we need to be operating on multiple scales at once. So, like, you can't just be, pulling out a couple buckthorn by the roots and expect that to solve all the Earth's problem. We also need to be advocating for broader change at the same time. And, it's just one of these things where it's a balance that we need to strike. And I think that my hope with this book, I realized at some point that, I'm saying all these things, it's a love story, right? And it's also a celebration of nuance, which I really like. And I hope that the message that you get out of this, if you choose to read it, is not like, this is how you heal a forest in Vermont. It's like, take this feeling of these like nuances and these sacrifices and this humility that we need to apply to every single situation that we're going to encounter, and then apply it wherever you go. Because this is, just when you're restoring a forest, it's just one of many situations in which we need to have this broader view, in which we need to make sacrifices and compromises and to be pragmatic and to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good and many other things like that. And so I hope that wherever you are in the landscape, whatever scale you're operating at, you know that as well. Hey.
Hi, Ethan. You're a hunter,
Yeah.
and so be it. My question is, to address the overpopulation of deer on your property, are there contraceptive measures that can be employed?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I think that there are some sterilization methods that people have experimented with, but, I've been... on this book tour, I've been fortunate to go to a lot of parts of southern New England, right, where it's, here, what do we have? We think our landscape can sustain like 20 deer per square mile, and in the Champlain Valley, maybe we have 30 to 40 deer per square mile. In some of these other areas I've been to, they have 200 per square mile. And it's one of these interesting bittersweet things that we need to do. I mean, we extirpated the apex predator of this animal, and we're the apex predator of this animal now. And it's, I don't enjoy the act of killing a deer, but it's also something that I view as being a profound responsibility and something that is just, an ecological role like many others that we can help fulfill in these ecosystems. And to my mind, and I think about this with cutting trees too, where I think for a little while, I thought that if it made me sad to cut a tree or to kill a deer, that meant that I wasn't supposed to do it. And now what I believe is that if I can feel that way, and then if I can move through that to the other side and do these things that are these profound ecological responsibilities, even with that feeling of tenderness and that care, hopefully that will mean that I do it in the right way, that I'm not doing it wantonly, that I'm actually engaging in this, with the gravity that it deserves, because it's a big deal. So that's how I approach it. I think that there are places that have experimented with that, none that I know of in Vermont.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So Ethan will be around a little bit when we close this down. As I mentioned before, the books are on sale here. And from that reading, you can tell this is not only will you learn about the ecology and restoration, but it's also a work of poetry, which is amazing. So thank you again, Ethan, for coming. I'm going to introduce our last speaker, and he's going to close us down. And then we do have some refreshments and some snacks there. And hopefully we've created enough space and room for conversation for whoever else can stick around. I think some of our speakers are still here. I'll be around, and as I mentioned, Ethan will be here. I want to introduce Kirk Dombrowski, Dr. Kirk Dombrowski. He's the Vice President for Research here at the University of Vermont. Before that, he was the founding director of the University of Nebraska's Rural Drug Addiction Center. He's an active researcher. He's published widely. He's a cultural anthropologist by training, and he's got incredible institutional vision. And as I started out this whole event thanking several people, Kirk was another one that I was thanking because with his institutional vision of thinking about the natural areas as a core research facility and bringing it under his remit, we're really seeing the future of what these areas can become and how they can become more integrated into our research, into our scholarship, into our outreach, and into our action. So if I can welcome Kirk to the stage, and thank you very much for all of your support and for being here today.
And I'm standing after a long afternoon between you all and the social networking, so I'll keep it short. First, I want to give another round of applause to Ethan, because that was just so thoughtful and smart, and I was a little awed, so thank you. And Brendan and Josh Benish, who's not here today, who was part of a big part of organizing this, is someone that I just really want to make sure I acknowledge and say how much I appreciate. This idea came from Josh and Brendan and a couple of others when they came to President Prelock and I and said, you know, we have this tremendous asset that's used sometimes and coordinated in haphazard ways as best we can. Brendan's out there cutting paths and doing the maintenance, and I need him to write articles and get some grants, so we got to figure this out. So we sat down and talked a lot about it, the president and I, when she was the provost, and we thought that one of the ways that we could help sustain what was great about it and build on that was to put some institutional structure around what was a tremendous university asset that really didn't have a set place. And so we have a model in research. It's called a core facility. We use it for our high-performance computing center and our big medical instrumentation. And what we do is we create a unit that has its own kind of standalone structure. We put some resources behind it, and it allows us to organize and keep track of, encourage, build the use and appreciation and recognition of that as this tremendous university asset. And so they came back to us with the name Frills. Okay, we follow along. We're not top down. So we asked them to work out a plan and a budget. They came back with, I think their original ask was like $3.5 million or something. I think we said, maybe let's just rethink that part of it a little bit. But what we're going to be able to do is put some care for the landscape, put some organization for the use, put some publicity opportunities behind it, and really keep better track so that we understand, for many of the things that you've talked about today, what the actual use is and what that means for the future of this tremendous resource. And so beginning this year, we will have a new Frills core facility, and it really is all about enhancing the research mission. It's about enhancing our scholarly pursuits on campus, our student opportunities to grow in this area, and really, I think Ethan said, a nostalgia for the future. That's a term, Ethan, I'm going to totally steal repeatedly, let's just be honest, for a while now, because I think that's exactly the spirit in which we go into this, which is a looking forward by looking back on what a tremendous asset this is. And so we're really hoping that you'll see a big difference moving forward, and that this will be 50 years from now something that we can talk about just as in equally glowing terms. So again, thank you all for coming today. Thank you for your support. And please help me to welcome in a new core facility with some great new people to make sure this goes further in the future. Thanks.